When I was 23, I worked as a trail guide on the Appalachian Trail near Shenandoah. I loved the job because it meant spending entire days in the mountains, showing visitors the best spots for photos and wildlife watching. Most tourists were friendly families or college groups looking for a bit of adventure. I had been doing this for about 2 years, so I knew every mile marker, every switchback, every creek crossing like the back of my hand. My schedule was simple. Meet the group at the visitor center around 8 a.m., do a short gear check, then hike 5 to 8 miles depending on their fitness and interest. I'd point out where to spot deer, what mushrooms were safe to touch, where to refill water. Then by mid-afternoon, I'd be heading back to my little cabin tucked behind the ranger station. The job didn't pay much, but I got to live in the forest full-time. I had a small solar panel for electricity and propane for heating water. No cell signal, no traffic sounds, just wind, birds, and the occasional bear. My parents didn't love the fact that I was using my biology degree to be a glorified tour guide, but I felt more alive up there than I ever did in a lab or office. I stayed in shape, slept well, and met all sorts of interesting people from all over the country. In late September, I started noticing the same man showing up on different tours. It was subtle at first. A Tuesday group of retirees from Michigan. He was there. Then again 3 days later, with a group of German tourists. He stood out because of the red baseball cap he wore every time. Mid-40s maybe, a bit heavy-set, with a patchy beard and a quiet, deliberate way of walking. He always lingered near the back, asked a lot of questions about local animals, mostly predators, and remembered my name after the first tour. "Hey Dan," he'd say, like we were old buddies. "Spotted any bobcats lately?" At first, I figured he was just a nature nerd with a flexible vacation schedule. We did get repeat hikers sometimes. But then another guide, Joel, mentioned seeing the same guy in his tour group. "Red cap?" Joel asked. "Yeah, dude asked me if I knew what trails you usually guide. Said you're the most knowledgeable one or something." That made my stomach twitch a little, but I shrugged it off. People had their favorites. I'd had families ask for me by name before, even tipped me afterward. Still, I started keeping an eye out for him. The following Monday, he showed up again. This time with a family group from North Carolina. I saw the cap before I saw his face. He gave me a quick nod and hung back like usual. Didn't talk much during the hike, just followed and listened, taking pictures with his phone. When we stopped by a rocky overlook for snacks, I noticed he didn't eat or even sit. He just stood near a tree, half watching the group and half watching me. That night, I locked the cabin door for the first time in months. By the 3rd week of seeing him, I knew his voice before I even spotted him. Deep, flat tone, always asking about animal patterns. Do bears come down here during droughts? Or, you think coyotes ever follow hikers? That kind of stuff. I mentioned him to Susan, who ran the office schedule. She checked the rosters and confirmed his name hadn't shown up more than once, which meant he was using aliases or just tagging along unnoticed. That was unusual. Every group member had to check in for liability reasons. "He might be hopping in without paying," she said. "We've had that before. People pretending they're with a group. I'll flag it if he shows again." That Friday, I took a college group on a tougher loop. Around mile 4, right as we were crossing a narrow log bridge, I felt someone watching me. I turned, and there he was. Red cap, half hidden behind a pine about 30 feet off trail. Not part of the group. Not even pretending to be this time. Just standing there, half in shadow, staring at me like he was waiting for something. I kept my face neutral and didn't say anything to the students, but I picked up the pace and cut the hike short. That night, I radioed the main ranger office and let them know. They said they'd send someone out to patrol the nearby sections the next day. I tried to relax, played some music, made a late dinner. Around midnight, I stepped out to brush my teeth by the water barrel. There were fresh boot prints in the mud near my porch. Not mine. My boots were still dry from staying on the stone path earlier. These ones were deeper, a little wider. Like someone had walked right up to my door, then turned around. The fourth week, he stopped showing up for the official tours. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. That's when I began hearing sounds around my cabin at night. It started small, just a soft whistle, but it matched the exact 3-note pattern he used on hikes when pointing out birds. The first time I heard it, I froze in place, listening through the thin cabin walls. I told myself it was probably a coincidence. Some other hiker trying to imitate a bird, maybe. But then I heard the same whistle again the next night. Same time, just after 9 p.m., when I'd be settling in with a book or cooking dinner. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, walking along the trail behind my cabin. The trail was public, but no one ever used it that late. Whoever it was always stopped just at the edge of the trees, far enough to not be seen, close enough to hear me if I spoke. I stood in the dark sometimes, not daring to turn on the lights, just listening. After a while, the footsteps would go back the way they came. I finally brought it up with my supervisor, Rick. He checked the logs and said nobody matching that guy's description had been on the sign-in sheets for over a week. Maybe he'd moved on. I wanted to believe that. The next night, I heard the whistle again, but this time it was closer. Instead of coming from the main trail, it came from the narrow path that wrapped around the back of my cabin, just outside my bedroom window. That was the moment I stopped pretending it was nothing. I closed my curtains, moved a dresser in front of the bedroom door, and slept with a hatchet on the nightstand. I didn't sleep much. A day later, my neighbor Ellen, who lived a quarter-mile away, came by. She told me she'd seen someone with a flashlight walking around near my area the past 2 nights. Not on the trail, through the woods. That hit hard. It wasn't just footsteps. Someone was circling my home. I asked if she got a look at his face. She hadn't, just saw the light moving between trees before it shut off suddenly. That Friday night, the knocking started. It was just after 9:15 p.m. I was sitting on the couch with my lights off, a habit now, when I heard the whistle again. 3 notes. Then a soft knock on the door. I didn't move. Another knock. I got up slowly, went to the peephole. I saw the red cap. Couldn't see his face, just the outline and that hat. My heart was pounding, but I didn't say anything. He knocked again, then spoke. "Dan, you in there? I got something important to tell you about the trails." I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. As I dialed the ranger station, he started speaking again, louder this time. "I've been watching you, Dan. I know your schedule. I know when you hike. I know what time you eat." I pressed the phone to my ear. He kept talking. "I've been leaving you gifts. You didn't see them? The rocks on your porch? I carved a whistle like the one you liked. Left it by your door. I hadn't seen any of that. Not once. Which meant he was coming here while I was gone, during the day. Walking right up to my cabin in daylight and leaving things behind without me knowing." The knocking stopped. I heard footsteps circling around the cabin, then scratching sounds near the back window. I told the dispatcher he was trying the windows. They said a ranger was already en route. I crouched behind my kitchen counter with the lights off and didn't move for 20 minutes. I heard him testing the back door, then tapping the window glass lightly like he was checking for movement inside. Then the sound of tires on gravel. A ranger truck. Headlights lit up the trees. I peeked outside. He was gone. But the footprints were still there in the mud, circling the entire cabin. One set. Deep. Fresh. The ranger confirmed they matched boot size and tread from the last prints found earlier that week. 2 days later, they found him waiting at the main trailhead near the visitor center. He wasn't trying to hide, just sitting on a bench like he was early for a hike. In his backpack, they found several trail maps. My daily routes were marked in red ink. Each map had dates, times, and notes. He'd been tracking me for over a month. There were photos, taken during tours, some zoomed in so close you could count the threads on my shirt. But others were more disturbing. Shots of my cabin from a distance. One from the backside, showing the window I always kept cracked for air. Another of my porch during the day. I never noticed him taking them. He had journal pages too. Dozens. All filled with notes about me. Conversations we supposedly had. Things I'd supposedly said to him. He wrote about hikes we never went on together. Imagined us laughing, talking late into the evening. He wasn't local. Drove down from Pennsylvania after taking one of my tours back in June. He'd rented cabins along the trail, sometimes just pitching a tent to stay off the grid. He told the rangers he came back because he felt a connection and believed I was sending him signals. They took him into custody without a fight. When I asked what would happen next, the ranger just said, "That's up to the courts, but he won't be coming back here anytime soon." I asked for a transfer that day. They moved me to a section of the Appalachian Trail closer to town. I was given a small apartment above the local park office. No more living alone in the woods. I still lead hikes, still enjoy the quiet, but I don't linger on the trails anymore. I don't chat as freely with strangers. I keep things professional, friendly, but distant. The mountains haven't felt the same since. Now when I stop to admire the view or listen to the wind, I still check behind me. Not because I think he'll come back, but because I know how easy it was for someone to get that close without me knowing. It was the padlock that did it for me. Something about seeing that brand new, shiny hardware on a house that was clearly supposed to have been empty for decades. It didn't sit right. You expect rust, rot, maybe a few broken windows, but not a brand new lock with a barcode sticker still half attached. We'd started that day early, breaking camp around 7. Fog still hung low over the trail, and everything smelled damp, like wet leaves and bark. We followed Dr. Martinez's lead, hiking along a stretch of trail that barely looked used. Twigs snapped underfoot, and thorns tugged at our pants. I remember brushing spider webs from my face every few steps. The trail wasn't marked anymore, just a memory of a footpath through thick underbrush. It took us maybe 3 hours to reach the clearing. At first, it didn't look like much. Just a patch of light ahead where the forest opened up. Then we saw the house. 1 story, log frame, the roof sagging a little in the middle but mostly intact. A rusted pump out front. A barn off to the side with part of its roof caved in. Dr. Martinez paused, squinting. He said this was supposed to be the Henderson place, but things weren't where he remembered. The barn, for one, was on the wrong side, and the outhouse was gone entirely. We started walking the perimeter. Anna and Blake took their phones out, snapping pictures. Jules poked around behind the barn. I stayed near the front porch with 2 of the others. That's when I noticed the tracks. 2 sets of tire marks, recent enough that you could still see the tread. They curved around the side of the house and disappeared into the trees where the brush had been cleared. Someone had driven up here. Not years ago. Days, maybe. Then there was the plastic. Under the porch, a few feet in, someone had stashed a stack of empty gas containers. Bright red. No dust on them. One still had a Home Depot sticker. They were clean, like they'd been placed there recently. I remember crouching down to get a better look and feeling my stomach drop. This wasn't just some forgotten ruin. Dr. Martinez was muttering to himself, scrolling on his GPS. He showed us the screen. "We're in the right spot," he said. "This is the Henderson site. But none of this," he waved around, "was here last time. At least not like this." The padlock was the final piece. It hung heavy on the front door, silver and new, no rust at all. I stood there just staring at it. A place like this shouldn't need a lock. And if it did, it shouldn't be one you can buy last week at a hardware store. "Maybe someone's squatting here?" Jules offered, walking back up. She looked uneasy now, brushing dirt from her pants. "Or the Park Service is using it for something?" Dr. Martinez shook his head. "If it was the Park Service, there'd be signs, permits, something. This is off the books." We spread out again, checking the barn and the woodshed. Most of it was falling apart. Inside the barn were some tools, old axes with rotting handles, rusted saw blades, but also newer stuff. A blue plastic tarp, some rope still coiled in packaging, a bucket of nails, mixed in like someone had brought them here not long ago. Anna called us over to a pit near the back of the clearing. Looked like it had once been a fire ring or a trash burn area. But what she showed us wasn't ash. It was the burned remains of clothing. Denim mostly. Part of a jacket zipper was still visible. Melted plastic, half a boot sole. No bones or anything like that. But it didn't look like trash. It looked like someone had tried to get rid of personal belongings. Dr. Martinez didn't say anything. Just stared, then turned and walked quickly back to the house. He tried the padlock. It didn't budge. He pressed his ear to the door for a few seconds. Then he backed away. "We're not supposed to be here," he said quietly. "Pack up. We're heading back to the main trail. Now." None of us argued. The tone in his voice cut off any questions. We started gathering our things, but I kept glancing back at that lock. Something about the whole setup felt like we'd stepped into someone's hideout. As we moved back into the woods, I took one last look over my shoulder. Just before the trees swallowed the clearing, I saw something move in the barn window. A quick shadow, a flicker of motion. Too fast to tell if it was a person or just a trick of light. I didn't say anything. Not then. I just kept walking. We retraced our steps in silence. No one really spoke until we were a good mile away. Even then, it was just short comments about the map, the trail. Like none of us wanted to say what we were thinking. It took us longer to find the main trail again. The overgrowth seemed worse on the way back, like branches had shifted, blocking our path more than before. The light had started to fade, and we had to pick up the pace. Dr. Martinez was at the front, walking fast, checking his GPS every few minutes. Around 4 p.m., we stopped for water at a small creek. While most of the group sat down, I stepped away to use the bathroom behind a rock outcrop. That's when I saw the tracks again. Not tires this time. Footprints. At least 3 sets, pressed into the soft mud at the edge of the creek. Fresh. Heading the same direction we had just come from. I crouched and looked closer. The prints were deep. Whoever made them was carrying something heavy. A few had scuff marks like someone was dragging a load. I stood up, scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I walked back to the group and tapped Dr. Martinez on the shoulder. I showed him the prints. He stared at them for a while, then looked back toward the trail. Then he turned and told everyone to keep moving. No water break. Just go. We needed to put distance between us and that place. No one complained. We hiked hard for another hour before we found a place to stop. It wasn't one of the designated campsites, just a flat spot off the trail where we could set up tents. Dr. Martinez didn't want to go further in the dark. We were setting up tents when Blake said he saw a light through the trees. Jenny had wandered a bit toward the side of the house before the rest of us finished checking the outbuildings. She called us over and pointed to a back window patched up with duct tape and a piece of cardboard. The tape was still sticky, and the cardboard hadn't faded. It wasn't a recent repair, maybe days old at most. Below it, muddy footprints led away from the window into the trees. The tread was clear despite the rainfall from the night before. We circled back toward the front, and that's when we noticed the inside of the cabin through the window. It wasn't abandoned at all. There were 2 rolled-up sleeping bags on the floor, a stack of canned beans and soup in the corner, and a few plastic bins. A battery-powered lantern sat on top of one of them, next to an open pack of AA batteries. Someone was definitely living here, and recently. Dr. Martinez didn't say much, but you could see him getting more agitated. He stepped away from the window and told us quietly but firmly to pack up. "We shouldn't be here," he said. "This might be private land. Let's move out now." We grabbed our gear without much argument. Cameras were zipped away, water bottles clipped back to bags. I was still slinging my pack over one shoulder when we heard it. A low growl of an engine coming up the old logging road. The sound bounced off the trees, and I remember freezing for a second before instinct kicked in. "Into the woods," Dr. Martinez said sharply. "Away from the road. Move." We didn't see the truck yet, but the engine was loud, echoing closer with each second. We darted into the trees opposite the road, scrambling over brush and dodging low-hanging limbs. Voices started up. 2 men, one shouting over the sound of the truck, the other yelling back with something sharp and angry. We didn't take the trail back. Instead, Dr. Martinez led us straight uphill, weaving through thick pines and tangled roots, just trying to put space between us and whoever was arriving. I looked back once and caught a glimpse of movement, figures by the house, the truck parked crooked near the porch. We weren't far in when we heard doors slam. One of the men shouted, "I told him clear, no more trespassing." The second voice answered, "Some damn kids messing around again. They're gonna learn." We crept another 20 yards before we dared crouch. Through the branches, we could just make out the 2 men pacing the clearing. One was in full camo, holding what looked like a rifle slung across his chest. The other had a ball cap and was pointing at our footprints like he was tracking us. Dr. Martinez motioned for us to stay low and keep moving. We didn't talk, just climbed, watching every step. But the hill was steep and littered with rocks and branches. Now and then a boot would knock something loose, and we'd all freeze as the sound echoed downhill. "They're up there," the man with the cap shouted. "Check the woods," the camo one said. "If they saw anything, we need to deal with it." The truck engine fired up again, and we could hear it rolling slowly along the edge of the clearing, crunching over gravel. Sounded like it was doing circles, maybe trying to see where we entered. We found cover behind a stack of moss-covered boulders about 100 yards up. From there, we had a partial view of the cabin. The men were moving slow, methodical. Every few minutes, the one with the rifle would walk toward the tree line, pull out binoculars, and scan the hillside. He lingered on our side more than once. I pressed myself low behind the rock, barely breathing. Time crawled. I checked my watch once. It had been nearly an hour. The sun had dipped behind the trees. The light changed, long shadows cutting across the clearing. Finally, the truck pulled forward, and the men got in. One last scan with the binoculars, and they drove off down the old road. We waited another 10 minutes before Dr. Martinez signaled us to move. The forest had gone quiet. Crickets started up as twilight took over. We walked in single file, no flashlights, just the dull blue of dusk guiding our steps. Dr. Martinez stuck to the GPS, checking it constantly. We didn't stop until we were back on the main trail. It was close to midnight. Everyone was drained, clothes torn from brush, faces scratched and tired. We made camp off the trail and didn't even bother with a fire. The next morning, we hiked straight to the ranger station. Dr. Martinez went inside alone. He came out an hour later with a pale face and a look that said we wouldn't be talking about what happened again. He told us the rangers said that stretch of land wasn't public. It wasn't even technically under park jurisdiction. It had been part of a private land dispute for decades. No official records on file about any homestead or maintenance work, but the rangers did admit they'd had incidents. Hikers chased off. Unauthorized activity reports. Dr. Martinez described what we'd seen, the people, the gear. The ranger's tone apparently changed after that. Told him to stay clear of the area, said they'd notify the sheriff's office. Back at the college, things settled quickly. No police followed up with us, no statements. But Dr. Martinez canceled future trips to any unofficial sites. From then on, we only stuck to established trails. No more old maps, no more off-grid hikes. I still think about it sometimes. Not just the men, but what we didn't see. Why they were so angry. Why that house had fresh food and sleeping bags. What was burned in that pit behind the barn. It wasn't just squatting. That kind of anger doesn't come from hiding out. It comes from protecting something. The way they talked, the way they searched, that wasn't panic. That was control. They knew that land. They felt entitled to it. And we weren't supposed to be there. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't stray from marked trails. Not because of animals or getting lost, but because sometimes the real danger is running into people who think the woods are theirs, and that anyone else is a threat. And if we'd been just 10 minutes slower, I don't think we'd have made it out. I started volunteering for search and rescue in the Blue Ridge section of the Appalachian Trail about 3 years ago. It was one of those gigs that combined outdoor time with something that actually felt useful. I'd gotten my wilderness first aid certification back in college, mostly because I spent every weekend hiking anyway. SAR felt like a natural extension. Our team was made up of 12 volunteers, all trained and on call when park rangers needed backup for searches. Most of the time, it was routine stuff. Hikers staying out past sunset, sprained ankles, people losing track of trail markers and ending up on the wrong loop. The kind of thing that resolved itself within a few hours, usually with a sheepish laugh and a thank you. We carried standard gear, GPS, radio, basic medical kit, printed trail maps with elevation lines. A few of us added our own touches. I had a laminated checklist I clipped to my backpack, mostly to run through in a hurry before heading out. There wasn't much glory to it, but it felt solid, predictable. Even the rougher weather searches didn't bother me much. I'd learned the terrain so well, I could probably draw a topographic map of half those trails from memory. One thing about SAR work, you always go in pairs. Mine was Sarah. She joined about a year after I did, had a serious, methodical way of moving through the woods. Barely spoke during the hikes unless she had something to say. That made her good at this kind of job. You didn't want someone who talked just to kill time. Most days, our missions were uneventful. Locate, assess, escort back to the trailhead. A handful of times we'd needed to call in a helicopter or hike someone out with an improvised stretcher. But nothing that felt threatening. Not until that Thursday in September. That morning, just past 9 a.m., we got the call. A man named Tom Morrison, 45, had been reported missing. According to the rangers, his wife called around midnight after he didn't come home. Apparently, that wasn't normal behavior for him. He was ex-military, now in construction management. One of those guys who did early morning trail runs for fun. He told his wife he was doing an 8-mile loop and would be home for dinner by 6. Pretty standard section of the trail, with a gradual incline, a couple of overlook spots, and a few offshoots that weren't on the official maps. His car was still in the parking lot. Windows up, doors locked, cell phone on the passenger seat. The thing that stood out: no rain, no wind, nothing extreme in the forecast. Clear skies, good visibility. Rangers had already checked the 2 main shelters and the first aid stations. Nothing. They'd sent out a couple of drone sweeps, but that stretch of trail had dense canopy in parts. Not ideal for aerial searches. Our team leader divided us into pairs and split the surrounding zones. Sarah and I were assigned the southern arc of the loop, the last portion Tom would have hiked if he stayed on course. We parked just off the fire road around 10:30, hiked in until we reached the trailhead marker, and started moving south. Sarah carried the GPS unit. I marked flags on low branches with reflective tape every quarter mile like protocol required. That section of trail dipped through thick laurel brush and then opened up into a ravine. We moved slow, calling his name at regular intervals, watching the underbrush for signs: disturbed leaves, gear, footprints. By 11:45, we reached the first off-trail site, an old Firewatch foundation. It was empty except for an abandoned campfire ring that looked months old. Sarah swept the perimeter while I walked east about 30 yards into the woods, just to see if anything caught my eye. I noticed a boot print near a rock outcropping, but it wasn't deep enough to tell if it was recent. I radioed Sarah. Got something that might be a print. Could be old. She came over, crouched next to it, and nodded. Could be his. Or anyone's. Let's mark it. We pressed on another mile. Around 12:20, we hit a point where the trail narrowed against a steep drop. To the left was a ridge. To the right, a 50-foot slope leading to a creek. Sarah paused and looked at the slope. "Think we should check down there?" she asked. I scanned the area. No broken branches, no signs of a slide. If he fell, we'd see drag marks. Doesn't look disturbed. We followed the trail another quarter mile and then split for a brief sweep. Standard maneuver, 20 meters apart, eyes on each other. That's when I spotted a gray bandana tied to a low tree. Not hanging, more like it had been dropped and snagged. I picked it up with a stick. No blood, no dirt. I flagged it and marked the GPS. Sarah came over, frowned at it. "His wife mention if he wore one?" I shook my head. She said he left his phone, didn't say anything about gear. We logged it and kept moving. Just past 1 p.m., we crossed a trail intersection that wasn't on our map. A narrow footpath, no signage, just faint boot tracks leading southwest. Not an animal trail. Someone had walked it, maybe recently. Sarah hesitated. "This isn't on the loop." I checked my map again. Nothing marked. "Want to check it out? 15-minute sweep and backtrack?" She nodded. That footpath curved through dense trees and then abruptly opened into a clearing, maybe 30 feet wide, circular, quiet. No bird song. There was something about the way the air felt there. Not cooler, just dead still. At the far end was a pile of stacked rocks, waist high, like a cairn but sloppy. Sarah approached it, bent down. "Looks fresh." I circled left, checked the base of a tree where something metallic caught the light. It was a key ring, car key, house key, a gym fob. I radioed it in. Found a key ring. Might be his. The ranger on the other end confirmed Tom's wife said he had a red carabiner on his keychain. This one matched. We decided to grid search the clearing. Sarah started clockwise. I went counter. Near the stack of rocks, I spotted something half buried. Bright yellow nylon, like from a rain jacket. I pulled at it with a stick and unearthed a section of fabric. It looked torn, not cut, ripped. Sarah walked over, crouched next to me. "We're calling this in," she said, and reached for her radio. We found Tom's water bottle almost 2 miles off the planned loop, sitting on a flat rock beside a narrow stream. It was clean, full, and upright, like it had been placed there intentionally. There was no sign of a struggle around it, just quiet water trickling over stones. The thing was, there were no trails in that direction. No blazes, no signage, not even a faint footpath. We only found it because we were following what looked like broken branches and flattened grass. Sarah pointed out some disturbed underbrush near the edge of the stream. "This doesn't look like someone walked here on purpose," she said. "Like they were pushed or dragged." She moved ahead slowly, brushing aside low branches. I followed, watching the ground. The trail signs got stranger. Scuff marks on tree trunks, a sock snagged on a branch, and finally, one of Tom's hiking poles. It was jammed between 2 saplings, bent slightly like it had been wedged there hard. We stopped. "This was placed," I said. "No way that's accidental." Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. Someone had led him here, and it wasn't an accident. The air smelled odd, not like decay, more chemical, sharp, like burnt plastic or old motor oil. Sarah wrinkled her nose. "You smell that?" I nodded but didn't say anything. I didn't like this place. We radioed our GPS coordinates to the base camp and asked for additional teams to come search this section. The ranger on duty acknowledged and told us to hold our position, but then added something strange. They'd been picking up unusual scanner traffic the past few days. Garbled voices, background static, weird fragments of conversation about keeping watch and not letting them take it. Apparently, other SAR teams had also found strange piles of rocks arranged in patterns that didn't match anything natural. Concentric circles, lines pointing toward ravines. One team said it looked like someone was marking territory. The forest was too still. No wind, no birds. Sarah was writing down time logs and flagging the path for the next team when we heard it. A voice. A man's voice, faint but clear, calling help. We both stopped. I radioed base again, told them we were moving toward a possible victim. We followed the voice about a 1/4 mile deeper into the trees. The trail narrowed, branches pulling at our clothes. Then we saw him, Tom. He was tied to a thick pine tree with climbing rope around his chest and arms, legs partially free but trembling from exhaustion. His face was pale, lips cracked. He blinked hard when he saw us. "Please," he said, barely audible. We rushed over. I checked the knots while Sarah knelt and opened her canteen. Tom drank greedily, coughing. His wrists were raw. "He said he'd be back," he whispered. "He always comes back." "What happened?" Sarah asked. Tom kept his eyes on the trees as he spoke. "Guy in hunting gear. Came up on me yesterday. Said someone fell up ahead. Seemed normal at first. Then he pulled a knife, made me walk for hours. Said I needed to learn to respect the woods." "He hurt you?" I asked. "Just tied me up. Said he wasn't trying to kill me. Just scare me. Punish me." I started cutting the ropes. That's when we heard the snapping. Not one branch, several. From the trees to our right. Someone was moving, slowly, just outside our sight line. Sarah stood and radioed. "Possible hostile. We're being watched. Repeat. Suspect may be in the area. Request immediate backup." I pulled Tom to his feet. He winced but managed to stand. We gave him more water, started checking his condition. Blood sugar, pulse, pupil response. He was dehydrated, but nothing broken. I looked up toward the tree line. Just the dark shape of branches. But something was out there. The movement was deliberate. too controlled for an animal. Someone was circling. "He said justice out here is different," Tom muttered. "Mountain justice. Said nobody would come looking for me." We moved fast, double pace. I led, Sarah flanked Tom. We stayed quiet. I glanced back every few minutes, and I could feel it. That presence still there, tracking our movement. We reached the main trail just before 3 p.m. 2 more SAR teams were waiting, armed with radios and med kits. One of them had a tranquilizer rifle. Not for people, but it still made me feel better. They took Tom and started walking him to the evac point. We gave our report to the ranger in charge, every detail logged and timed. Search teams swept the area into the evening. They didn't find the man. What they did find, a day later, was a hidden camp about a mile west of where Tom had been tied. It was built into a hollow under a ridge, well concealed with brush and camouflage netting. Inside were tarps, empty food wrappers, water jugs, a small burner, and notebooks. The notebooks were the part that stuck with me. Dozens of pages. Handwritten notes about hikers, descriptions, license plates, the times people usually came through, what gear they wore. There were strange codes too, like Group A trespassers and Type 3 movement at West Lot. One entry described Tom exactly, down to his boots. Another said, "Lesson in progress. Watch return route." The man had been watching people for weeks, planning. Tom gave his statement, stayed in the area just long enough to identify a suspect from an old photo lineup, a man known to local law enforcement. He'd been reported in 3 different altercations over the summer, once threatening a family for lighting a campfire too close to his land. They never found him. Tom moved to Ohio 6 months later. New job, new house. He never hikes alone now. I stayed with SAR, but I keep a knife clipped to my belt and a whistle on my chest. People talk about bears and storms and snake bites, but those aren't the worst things out here. It's the ones who think they own the wild, the ones who look at federal land and see a kingdom, who wait in silence, just out of sight, watching, deciding who gets to come home and who doesn't. When I was 34, I switched from a desk job at the Forest Service to working as a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains section of the Appalachian Trail. I'd spent almost a decade behind a screen, writing up environmental reports and chasing down compliance paperwork. When the opportunity came to transfer to fieldwork, I didn't think twice. The idea of spending my days outside in the woods felt like a return to something I'd been missing. I'd grown up hiking and birding with my dad in North Carolina, so the mountains didn't feel new. They felt like coming back. The position came with a lot of responsibilities, patrolling about 25 miles of trail, checking permits, assisting lost hikers, reporting trail damage, and watching for signs of illegal camping or poaching. The park had plenty of visitors during the spring and summer, especially families, through hikers, and weekend campers. I usually saw a dozen or more people a day, sometimes more on weekends, but the farthest stretches of my patrol zone were quiet. There were 3 separate trails that looped together in a U-shape, and that far leg rarely had anyone on it except the occasional serious hiker. One of the things I liked most was being able to bring my birding knowledge into the job. The Forest Service liked that I could answer visitor questions and even teach the occasional informal talk on local birds and plants. I carried a small notebook and kept records on what species I saw and where. The variety was incredible. Wood thrushes, vireos, tanagers, even the occasional peregrine falcon up on the cliffs. It kept the job interesting, especially on longer days when nothing unusual happened. Most shifts were pretty standard. Hike in, make my rounds, check trailheads, note any broken signage, clear branches after storms. Sometimes there were small issues, campers leaving trash behind, or people building fires too close to trees. I'd report those, sometimes talk to the offenders if they were still around, and document everything in the evening logs. Wildlife sightings were frequent, but nothing out of the ordinary. Bears, mostly. They usually kept their distance. Every now and then, someone would report coyotes near the lower trails, but they never came close to people. Then, in early June, I started hearing odd things from hikers coming through the visitor center. It was always the same part of the trail, about 3 miles of winding path connecting 2 designated campsites. Families especially were mentioning some sort of sound that had frightened them. They described it as a loud, broken bird call, harsh and sudden, almost like a scream, but not like any bird scream they'd heard. A few said it sounded too human. Others claimed it came from different directions at the same time. Most of them ended their hikes early, heading back before dark. At first, I assumed it was exaggerated. People can get spooked easily out in the woods, especially if they're not used to being in nature. Owls, foxes, and even bobcats can make sounds that people aren't prepared for. But as the days passed, the reports kept coming. Always in that same area. Solo hikers, couples, people with kids. The timing was always late afternoon, and almost every report described the sound as moving, either circling them or echoing strangely through the trees. It didn't fit with any bird behavior I knew. I'd been tracking and identifying birds for over 15 years and nothing matched. Crows could be loud and unsettling, sure, but their patterns were familiar. Raptors had shrill cries but didn't mimic human tones. I even looked into the possibility of an escaped pet parrot or exotic bird, but no one had reported anything like that lost in the region. The following Monday, I planned a patrol that would take me through that specific section. I left just after sunrise, hoping to hit the area while it was still quiet and maybe catch sight, or sound, of whatever was causing the noise. The trail was shaded and steep in some spots, overgrown in others. I moved slowly, scanning for signs of wildlife, listening carefully. The air was cool and damp, typical for early summer mornings in the Smokies. The forest was quiet, not silent, but still. Normal birdsong, the rustling of squirrels, the buzz of insects. By midday, I was in the heart of the section where most of the reports had originated. I paused for lunch on a flat rock overlooking a bend in the trail, surrounded by thick underbrush and a few charred stumps from an old controlled burn. I stayed still longer than usual, hoping patience would help me catch something unusual. I wrote down the usuals: cardinal, towhee, titmouse. Nothing strange. It wasn't until I started heading out, around 1:30 in the afternoon, that I noticed the quiet. Not silence exactly, but the background noise of the forest had shifted. Birds had gone quiet. Even the constant background hum of insects seemed reduced. It wasn't immediate. It crept in as I walked, like descending into a patch of fog you didn't realize you were in until you were deep inside it. I stopped walking and waited, turning in a slow circle to listen. I stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes. Nothing happened. Then I heard it. It came from somewhere up the ridge to my left. One short, high-pitched cry. Not long, but harsh. A broken rasp, like something imitating a bird, but not quite getting it right. It was followed immediately by a second, from a different direction. This one sounded closer, behind me, and lower down the hill. I didn't move. I just listened. 2 more followed, each from a different spot. Short, sharp bursts. The tone was wrong. Too flat, too dry, like a recording played through a damaged speaker. There was no rhythm to it, No pattern. I slowly unsnapped the loop on my belt that held my bear spray and backed off the trail toward a cluster of thick-trunked trees. I stayed behind the cover and crouched down low. The sounds stopped for a while. Then one came from directly ahead of me, past the curve of the trail, maybe 50 feet out. I couldn't see anything through the brush, but it was close. I waited there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, not moving. Eventually, the usual forest sounds started returning in bits and pieces. A single bird call, the buzz of a fly. I stood up slowly, keeping my hand on the canister, and took a few steps forward to the edge of the brush. The trail was empty. I walked another 100 yards without hearing anything else. Then I noticed a cluster of feathers by the base of a tree. They weren't scattered like from a predator kill. They were arranged, neatly, in a ring around the trunk, all facing outward. During my 4th patrol of that section, I finally heard the calls myself and immediately knew they weren't made by any bird. It was around 4 p.m. on a humid Tuesday, and the trail was unusually quiet for that hour. I had paused on a ridge, scanning the valley below, when the sound came again, sharp and high-pitched, almost like a hawk in distress. But it had an artificial quality to it, too clean, too controlled. It didn't rise or fall like a natural call. It was just a single repeated note every few seconds. I moved quickly but quietly off the trail, trying to get closer without making noise. The sound stopped as soon as I stepped into the brush. I stood still for a few minutes. Nothing. Then, as soon as a group of hikers, 2 adults and a teen, walked into view on the trail below me, the sound started up again. Same tone, same rhythm, but now it seemed to be coming from a different direction, like someone had moved. Again, it stopped the second I tried to get closer. This happened 3 more times that day, always the same pattern. The sounds only happened when hikers were nearby. I stayed hidden in the brush, watching, and the calls would begin just as people entered that stretch, then stop whenever I moved. It was deliberate. Someone was mimicking bird calls to get attention, and not just randomly. There was a system to it, a pattern. That night, I reviewed my field notes and GPS logs. I had marked every time and spot where the sounds occurred. Looking at them laid out like that, it was obvious. They were all positioned to pull attention toward the same patch of thick woods near a dried-out stream bed. The area was dense, hard to see through, even in daylight. No clear trails ran through it. I radioed HQ and explained what I'd found. My supervisor agreed this wasn't an animal issue anymore. It was human. She approved a temporary surveillance detail and assigned another ranger, Jake, to assist me on patrols starting the next day. On Friday afternoon, Jake and I split up and positioned ourselves on opposite sides of the trouble area. We each took a position hidden behind trees with a clear view of the trail, but also enough cover to remain unseen. We used radios with earpieces and agreed to keep chatter to a minimum unless there was movement. Around 3 p.m., I saw a family, a couple with 2 small kids, hiking up the trail. They were moving slowly, stopping often. It was clear they were tourists, not regular hikers. Within a minute, the bird calls started up again. I could hear them clear as day, coming from somewhere to my left. The family stopped walking, the father looking around with a puzzled expression. The kids froze. Then I saw movement, just a flash of dark green among the trees. Someone was crouched behind a cluster of ferns, wearing camo clothing, using his hands like a funnel to amplify the sound. I couldn't see his face. I radioed Jake, told him I had visual on one individual. Before Jake could respond, I heard a separate noise. Branches snapping, coming fast from my right. A second man was moving quickly through the brush, angling toward the trail and the family. This one wasn't trying to be quiet. He was making a direct line toward them. The kids started crying from the noise, and the parents were clearly spooked, turning in circles, trying to locate the source. I stepped out of cover and raised my hand. "Park Ranger, keep moving down the trail, now." The parents didn't argue. They grabbed their kids and started walking quickly, glancing behind them. The man making the sounds froze when he saw me, then bolted deeper into the woods. I didn't chase him. I kept my eyes on the second guy, the one heading toward the trail. Jake came out of cover just as the man reached a break in the brush. He had a baseball bat in one hand, duct tape tucked into his waistband. Jake tackled him clean, brought him down hard, and had him restrained in seconds. We radioed for backup. Within 20 minutes, 2 more rangers arrived, and we escorted the suspect out of the woods while the search for his partner began. He didn't resist after the arrest. In fact, once in custody, he admitted to everything with very little prompting. He said they'd been running the scam for almost 2 months. His partner would create the fake bird calls to lure hikers, usually families with kids, off the trail under the pretense of an injured animal. Once the victims were isolated or distracted, the second man would move in, armed, and demand valuables. If they didn't cooperate, he threatened them. According to him, they'd never seriously injured anyone, but they made enough threats that people complied. He said they picked families because parents were more likely to respond to distress calls, especially ones that sounded like animals in trouble. They'd even set up a basic camp deep in the forest, completely hidden, where they stored stolen items. He said his partner would circle back to the camp after each job, and they'd split whatever they got. When asked why they thought they'd get away with it, he just shrugged and said, "People don't want to deal with cops on vacation." We searched the forest for 2 more days with additional law enforcement support, but never found the second man. Either he'd moved on fast, or had a second hideout we didn't know about. But the camp was found, half a mile from the trail, behind a wall of brambles. Inside were dozens of wallets, bags, watches, hiking gear, and even some passports. The ground was packed down from long-term use. They'd been out there a while. We cross-referenced missing property reports and identified at least 6 incidents that matched the suspect's description. Some victims hadn't reported anything at all, likely just wanting to leave quietly after being threatened. One couple had filed a vague complaint about men in the woods, but hadn't given enough detail to investigate. After the arrest, the fake bird calls stopped. The forest returned to normal, though I never walked that stretch of trail the same way again. I started including warnings during visitor briefings. Nothing dramatic, just reminders to stay on marked trails and report anything unusual. The second man was never caught. Maybe he left the area. Maybe he's still out there. But I haven't heard those sounds since. And now, whenever I hear something strange in the woods, I don't assume it's just wildlife. Not anymore. So when I was 20, I signed up for this summer volunteer program studying ecosystems in the Appalachian Mountains. I needed the credits for my biology degree and thought it would be a nice break from the Texas heat. Our group had 8 people, plus Tom, this weathered park ranger who'd been guiding trips for 15 years. We'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail sections for 2 weeks, collecting plant samples and documenting wildlife. The work was pretty routine. Wake up at dawn, hike to designated areas, take notes, collect specimens. Tom always carried bear spray and made us practice safety protocols. But honestly, we all got comfortable pretty fast. Most days we saw nothing bigger than squirrels and the occasional deer. I remember thinking this job was going to be easier than I expected. We were staying in canvas tents in a clearing about a 15-minute walk off the trail. No phone signal, obviously. The base camp had a single old two-way radio Tom used to check in once a day with the ranger station. At night, we'd cook over a fire and listen to Tom tell stories about hikers getting lost or breaking ankles. That kind of thing. It all sounded exaggerated, especially since nothing had even remotely gone wrong so far. The worst problem was mosquito bites and someone spraining an ankle on the second day. On the second Tuesday of the trip, we were assigned a loop trail near the stream about 3 miles out. It had rained the night before, so everything smelled damp and clean. We moved slow that morning, logging moss samples and noting signs of salamander nests. The trail wasn't crowded. Actually, we hadn't seen a single other group on that segment, which wasn't unusual. We were technically off-season for the bigger crowd of hikers. Around noon, we stopped for lunch at a clearing beside a narrow stream. Tom picked the spot because it was slightly sunken into a dip in the land, with some natural stone shelves for sitting and easy access to fresh water. There was a fallen tree we could lean our packs on, and some flat rocks to place our food without getting everything muddy. I sat down next to Rachel, one of the other students, and unwrapped my sandwich while she sorted through the specimen tubes in her kit. The others were spread out. 2 people filtered water upstream, and the rest sat in a half circle near Tom. The air was thick with insect noise. Dragonflies darted low over the water. I could hear someone laughing, but I don't remember what about. That's when Tom stood up sharply and raised his hand. Instantly, everything quieted. It wasn't just our group. Like, the woods itself went silent. No bugs, no birds, just the wind brushing the tops of the trees. He didn't say a word at first, just scanned the tree line, slowly. One hand stayed on the strap of his bear spray. His eyes were locked on something beyond us, uphill, and maybe 20 yards into the forest. I followed his gaze but didn't see anything. Nothing moved. Then in a low, steady voice, Tom said, "Nobody move. Nobody speak." His voice was calm, but absolute. Like, the kind of tone where you don't argue or ask questions. I froze in place with a bite of sandwich halfway to my mouth. Rachel's eyes were wide. She slowly lowered her arm. A few people downstream didn't hear him at first, so he repeated it slightly louder but still whispering, "Stay still. Quiet." We all obeyed. No one wanted to test whether this was just another drill or not. I kept glancing between Tom and the direction he was staring. Still nothing. Trees, underbrush, the slope of the hill. But I noticed the way his fingers flexed slightly on the canister. It was that stillness that got under my skin. The woods felt wrong. Even when we'd gone off trail before, there were always noises. Birds, bugs, branches creaking. But now, it was dead quiet. I started thinking about the safety protocols we'd gone over. How black bears usually avoid people. How you should make noise when hiking. How Tom had made us rehearse group safety formations. Then Tom took 2 slow steps toward the edge of the clearing. His shoulders were tight, eyes never leaving that spot on the ridge. I was behind him a bit, off to the left, so I could see the angle he was watching. That's when I saw it. Just a flicker of movement. A dark shape between 2 trees. Way too big to be a squirrel or raccoon. But it didn't move like an animal. It didn't dart or scurry. It just shifted, like someone leaning back slightly. Still too far to see clear details, but it had height. Human height. Maybe taller. I couldn't tell if it was wearing camouflage or just dark clothing, but it was standing still. Tom saw it too, obviously. He didn't move again, but I noticed his fingers on the spray can now had the safety flipped off. The rest of the group stayed frozen, watching him. I felt this sharp pinch in my stomach. Like everything in me said, do not move, do not call out. Something about how quiet that person was, how they didn't react when Tom noticed them. That was wrong. A lost hiker would wave, call out, try to come closer. This guy just stood there. Then he took a step forward. Not toward us exactly, but down the slope, still behind the tree cover. Tom tensed like he was about to do something. He turned his head just slightly and said, still very quiet, "Pack up slowly. No sudden moves." We started collecting our things in absolute silence. No one spoke. Rachel closed her kit with barely a sound. Someone further back was gently rolling a water bottle into their pack. I stood, bag in hand, not taking my eyes off the trees. The shape was gone. Nothing there now but trunks and shadows. Tom motioned for us to follow. We backed out of the clearing in single file, moving slow and steady. He walked backward at the rear of the line, spray still ready. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that shape again. But we didn't see him. Not then. Not the rest of the way back to camp. We made it to the fork in the trail without hearing a single footstep behind us. No cracking twigs, no rustling brush. Just the sound of our own boots and the wind. That's when I saw it emerging from the rhododendron thicket about 30 feet away. A full-grown mountain lion. It stepped out slow, like it knew we were watching, but didn't care. I've seen photos of them before, but nothing prepares you for the size of one in real life. Easily over 100 pounds, thick shoulders, long tail curling low. Its fur was dusty tan, with a scar across the bridge of its nose. And its eyes, those cold, yellow eyes, scanned every single one of us like we were objects. Not threats, not equals, just things in its space. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed loud. Tom's stance shifted immediately. He crouched slightly and lowered his free hand, motioning everyone to stay still. The lion didn't make a sound. No growl, no hiss, nothing. It didn't have to. The presence alone was enough. I could feel every hair on my arm stand up. The woods, already quiet, felt like it was holding its breath. It took a few steps forward, not fast, not aggressive, but totally unbothered. Its head was low, sniffing the ground. Probably caught the scent of our food wrappers. I remembered then. I hadn't zipped up my side pouch where the sandwich was. I was holding my hiking pole in one hand and trying not to clench it too hard. The cat looked at me. Not past me. At me. Just a few seconds, but long enough. Then it dropped its gaze and kept walking, each paw silent on the damp leaves. Tom's other hand hovered near the bear spray, but he didn't move to draw it yet. I could tell he was watching the wind direction, checking how far the spray might carry if he had to use it. The mountain lion came within 20 feet. 10. My knees felt like stone. I didn't dare blink too long. It stopped next to a low patch of ferns and sat down like it was settling in to watch a show. I don't know how long we stood like that. Time got strange. My whole field of vision was locked in on the animal. I noticed the way its tail flicked occasionally. It wasn't in attack mode, just curious, relaxed even. That almost made it worse. Then it stood again and started walking directly toward our group. That's when I realized I was standing closest to its path, a few feet ahead of the others, just to the right. My pack was slung on the ground beside me, sandwich still zipped up inside. I saw the cat's nostrils flare as it approached. Tom finally moved, just a little, hand inching toward the spray. The lion didn't even look at him. Its full attention was on me now. I couldn't back away, couldn't run. I remembered the training. No sudden movement, no eye contact, stay upright. But that was just words in my head. My body wouldn't move. It got within 2 feet. 2 feet. I could see its breath fogging slightly in the cool air. Could hear its breathing, slow and even. It bent its head down and sniffed the side of my pack, brushed its whiskers across the nylon. It nudged the pack once, then again, a little harder. The zipper jiggled. I didn't move. Not a twitch. I stared at a point on the tree behind it and counted every breath I took. I smelled it too. That deep, musky odor, thick like damp fur and old blood. Not clean like a zoo. Wild. The lion opened its mouth slightly and I saw the teeth. They weren't cartoon sharp or exaggerated. They were real. Dirty yellow with dark lines near the gums. Nothing about it looked fake or out of place. This wasn't an encounter. It was an inspection. Minutes passed. Maybe 5. Maybe less. Finally, after nudging my pack one more time, it exhaled and turned. No sound. Just the shifting of muscles under its skin. It walked back toward the trees, paused at the edge of the clearing, and vanished into the underbrush as if it had never been there. We stood frozen. Nobody dared speak yet. Tom slowly lowered his arm and signaled us not to move. "Wait," he whispered. So we waited. 20 minutes, maybe more. Tom kept watch, never blinking, scanning the brush line. Finally, he nodded once. "We're moving. Quietly." We packed up fast but careful. No one talked. No one looked around. We formed a line and hiked straight back to base camp without stopping. The trail that had felt peaceful earlier now felt narrow and exposed. Every snapped twig made me flinch. Back at camp, Tom radioed the park office immediately, told them the exact GPS coordinates, and gave a full report. Apparently, confirmed mountain lion sightings in this part of the range were almost non-existent. The rangers logged it as a rare encounter, but didn't send anyone out right away. I sat by the tent for an hour, still wearing my pack, not really processing anything. My hands had a slight tremor. Tom came over later, told us we'd done everything right. "They're curious, not killers," he said. "You just happen to smell interesting." I didn't laugh. Nobody did. That night we didn't build a fire, just ate cold rations and stayed close to the tents. Tom walked perimeter twice before lying down. Nobody slept much. The next day, we moved camps to a lower elevation, safer area, closer to one of the ranger towers. For the rest of the trip, we didn't have another sighting. But I never stopped watching the tree line. Every rustle, every shadow, I thought it might be back. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not in a traumatic way. Just the realization of how thin the line is between calm and chaos. One second we were eating sandwiches, the next, face to face with a predator that could have ended everything in seconds. We like to think we own the land, that we're in control with our hiking boots and trail maps and GPS watches. But out there, we're guests, just lucky ones. I don't hike alone anymore, and I never leave food unsecured. That moment, its breath on my face, its eyes looking through me, that never left. Probably never will. When I was 17, my grandfather died from cancer, and it hit our family really hard. Grandpa had lived with us for the last 5 years of his life, so the house felt empty without him shuffling around in his slippers and watching the same news channel at full volume. He had his routines, toast with butter at 6 a.m. sharp, reading the paper on the porch even in winter, nodding off in front of the TV by 8 p.m. When that stopped, everything felt off. The house got too quiet. My dad took it the hardest. They'd always had a tense relationship growing up, but the illness softened all that. For almost a year, Dad took care of him, feeding, helping him shower, managing his meds. I'd hear them talking late at night sometimes, even when Grandpa was too tired to respond. After the funeral, Dad changed. He got quiet, more than usual. He'd sit in Grandpa's old chair and just stare at the blank TV screen for hours. At first, Mom thought it was just grief, and maybe it was. But then he started leaving food in front of the chair. An apple, sometimes a cup of black coffee, just like Grandpa used to take it. I thought it was weird, but I didn't say anything. Mom did, though. They fought about it more than once. One day she snapped and said, "You need help, real help, not this spooky nonsense." Dad didn't reply. He just kept cleaning Grandpa's slippers like he was waiting for him to come back and wear them. Then, about a month later, he started talking about making contact. Not casually either. He said it at breakfast one morning, like someone would mention going to the store. "I've been reading," he said, "about connecting with loved ones after they pass. I think we can reach him." Mom dropped her spoon. She didn't say anything, just got up and walked away. I asked him what he meant, and he told me about this book he found at the used bookstore, full of methods for reaching the recently deceased. He showed me notes he'd taken, dates, candle types, chants. I've always been sensitive to things in the family. I don't really talk about it because it sounds made up, but I'd predicted Uncle Jerry's heart attack 2 weeks before it happened. Not with words, just this deep sense of dread that wouldn't go away until I got the phone call. Same with Grandpa. 3 months before the diagnosis, I knew something was off. I didn't say anything to Dad though, especially not when he started obsessing. He wasn't sleeping much. I'd wake up and hear him pacing around the living room. He started leaving doors open at night. Not just unlocked, wide open. Front door, back door, garage. When I asked why, he said, "So he can come in if he wants." It didn't stop. He got more into these books and started visiting forums online, places where people shared crossing over experiences. One night, he sat me down and showed me a profile of a woman named Madame Vera. Her picture was blurry, and her page looked like something out of the early 2000s. She claimed to be a spiritual liaison specializing in recent transitions. She charged $300 for house calls. I told Dad it was a scam, but he just looked at me like I didn't get it. "She knows what she's doing," he said. She came the following Tuesday, around 6 in the evening. It was already getting dark outside. She wore a long coat with fake fur on the collar, layers of scarves, and too much jewelry. Bangles, rings, a heavy pendant that looked like a glass eye. Her hair was dyed pitch black, roots showing, and her nails were painted blood red. She carried a worn leather bag with tassels on the ends. It jingled when she walked. My mom refused to be part of it and packed a small bag to stay at her sister's. She made her feelings clear before leaving. "If you're going to bring that circus act into our home, I want no part of it." She slammed the door behind her. I stayed. Not because I believed it, but because I didn't trust this woman alone in our house with my dad acting like a follower. She didn't say much at first. Just walked around, touching walls, asking a lot of vague questions. Where did he sleep? Where did he eat? Did he pass in this house? Dad answered everything eagerly. Eventually, she settled in the living room, where Grandpa used to watch TV. She had Dad turn off all the lights and unplug any electronics. Then she laid out these thick beeswax candles in a pattern I didn't recognize. 5 points, but not quite a star. The smell was intense, like burnt honey mixed with something bitter. She arranged crystals around the candles, quartz, obsidian, some purple one she called amethyst. Then she sprinkled dried herbs in a bowl and lit them with a long match. Smoke filled the room fast. It made my eyes water. She started humming, low and rhythmic, and said she was opening the spiritual pathways. She told Dad to hold a photo of Grandpa and repeat his full name 3 times. Dad did it without hesitation, clutching an old picture of them fishing. She kept her eyes closed the whole time, but kept glancing in the direction of the kitchen. Then she asked if we had anything Grandpa used to love eating. "Spirits like offerings," she said. Dad ran to the fridge and pulled out a container of leftover apple pie Mom had made. He placed it on a plate and set it beside the photo. The woman leaned in close and inhaled deeply, like she was smelling the memory itself. "He is near," she said softly. "Very near." At this point, I was sitting stiff on the couch, arms crossed. I didn't feel anything. No energy shift, no cold breeze, no voices. Just the stench of smoke and candle wax. She kept chanting in this fake-sounding accent and waving her hands slowly over the candles. Every now and then she would whisper, "Speak to us," and pause like she expected an answer. Then she froze. She turned her head sharply toward the kitchen and said, "He's standing by the door." Dad turned to look, eyes wide. There was nothing there. Just the dark kitchen, lit faintly by the hallway light. "He's hungry," she whispered. "He's waiting for your permission." The next morning, I woke up to this faint buzzing sound. I didn't think much of it until I walked into the living room and nearly gagged. There were flies everywhere, clustered around the windowsills, crawling over the plate of apple pie that no one had touched since the night before. I counted at least 30 before I stopped. The windows had been closed all night. It was October, too cold for flies. I grabbed a broom and started swatting at them, pushing them toward the door, sweeping up the dead ones. Dad came in just as I was dumping a dustpan full of them into the trash. "He's trying to reach us," he said. "Flies are a common sign." I just stared at him. He didn't even seem surprised. That was the beginning. The following days, we noticed more strange things. Lights flickering even though the bulbs were new. Creaking sounds at night that weren't in the usual spots where the old wood groaned. And things started disappearing. First, it was Grandpa's reading glasses. I figured maybe someone had packed them away accidentally. Then his coffee mug disappeared from the sink. I checked the dishwasher, the cabinets, even the garbage. Nothing. A few days later, his gold cross necklace vanished from the drawer where we'd kept his personal things. That one hit me. It had been in a zipped pouch. I remember because I was the one who put it there. By now, I wasn't sleeping well. Every creak sounded like someone moving through the hallway. I started waking up drenched in sweat, heart racing. One night, I couldn't catch my breath for almost a full minute. I didn't tell anyone. I thought I was losing it. My teacher started pulling me aside to ask what was going on. I couldn't explain it. I didn't even know how to begin. Dad, meanwhile, was slipping deeper into his obsession. He kept journals of signs Grandpa had sent us. Dates, times, weather conditions, even what he'd been thinking at the time. Every flicker, every sound, every misplaced item went into the log. I didn't say anything, but I knew something was wrong with our house. Not in a ghost way, just wrong. 2 weeks after the medium came, I was home alone after school. I usually went to a friend's house, but that day I had a big test to study for and wanted some quiet. I sat in the kitchen with my books spread out, trying to focus, when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, slow, like someone walking from Grandpa's room to the bathroom. I froze. Our dog had passed the year before. Mom was at work. Dad, too. No one else had a key. I grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and called Dad. "Someone's in the house," I whispered. He told me to calm down, said it was probably Grandpa just checking on me. That made my skin crawl. I didn't reply. I took the knife and crept up the stairs, step by step, trying to keep my hands steady. When I reached Grandpa's door, it was open. The room looked the same as always, nothing out of place. But the air was heavy, and the smell, like stale cigarettes. He hadn't smoked in years. We'd thrown away his last pack when he was diagnosed. I backed out of the room and walked out the front door without looking back. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I parked my car in the driveway and locked the doors. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw someone walking past the windows. I kept hearing things. Thumps, soft dragging sounds, creaks in the walls. At some point, I turned the engine on just to drown it all out. I must have drifted off around 3. When I went inside the next morning, Dad was already in the kitchen, staring at the floor. There were muddy footprints. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Too large to be mine. Too dirty to be from someone who lived there. They started at the basement door and ended at the back hallway. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But something changed in his face. A crack in the certainty. We went through the house together, checked the windows. That's when we noticed the basement window had been jimmied open from the outside. The latch was busted. Dad swore he always locked it. That same day, we called the cops. They did a sweep and didn't find anyone, but they told us to install cameras. So we did. One in the backyard, one by the front porch, one facing the basement window. A few days later, the mystery broke open. I was taking out the trash when I found something in the garden. One of Grandpa's old slippers. Muddy. We hadn't touched his clothes in weeks. I showed Dad. He went pale. We decided to check the woods behind our house, a little patch of trees that backed up against a creek. About a quarter mile in, we found it. A tarp strung between trees. Blankets, empty cans, a pile of our stuff. Grandpa's necklace was hanging from a branch. His glasses were tucked into a mug filled with rainwater. A moldy piece of pie sat in a bowl covered in flies. The police came and confirmed it belonged to a homeless man who'd been seen wandering nearby. They found him the next day, sleeping in a shed 3 blocks over. Turned out he'd been breaking into our house through the basement, not just once, but multiple times. During the seance, the medium, Madame Vera, had gone down there to prepare the space. She'd left the window unlocked. Worse, she'd scattered food offerings around the yard and inside the house. Apple slices in the vent, bread under the couch. Things meant to draw in insects and, apparently, other things too. She'd been running a scam, making people believe they were being contacted by the dead when she was just planting signs to prove her powers. The electrical issues? Old wiring made worse by moisture from that wet fall. The flickering lights, the buzzing sounds, all from overloaded circuits. The creaking and footsteps, heating pipes and expanding wood. The panic attacks? A mix of stress, grief, and some minor carbon monoxide exposure from our ancient furnace, which the inspector flagged a week later. We installed new detectors. My health started to improve. We moved out 2 years later. The couple who bought the house called us 6 months in. They asked if we'd ever had issues with the plumbing or lights. We just told them to get everything checked. I don't think they stayed much longer after that. Now, I don't jump at every sound. I don't watch shadows from the corner of my eye. But I do lock every window, every night. And I never leave food out. Grief opens doors. Some people walk through. Others crawl in. So, when I was 11, my parents were going through this really rough patch with constant fighting about money and Dad possibly losing his job. We lived in this small town at the base of the Appalachian Mountains where everyone knew everyone else's business. Mark and Linda, that's what I called my parents when I was mad at them, seemed to forget I existed most days because they were so focused on their problems. I spent a lot of time in my room on the second floor, playing video games and trying to block out the shouting downstairs. Our house was old and drafty, with windows that didn't lock properly and heating that barely worked in winter. I remember feeling really lonely and invisible, like I was just this problem they had to deal with on top of everything else. The fighting got worse at night, so I started wearing headphones to bed and sleeping with my door locked. Sometimes I would stare out my bedroom window at the mountain trail visible through the trees and imagine just walking away from everything. The trail looked peaceful from my window. It twisted up through thick trees and disappeared behind the ridge. I had never walked it, not even once. But from the second floor, I could just barely make out where the dirt path turned and vanished behind a wall of pine. On weekends, I would see hikers pass by, sometimes couples, sometimes old men with walking sticks. Once, there was a group of kids a few years older than me. They were loud, laughing, throwing pine cones. I remember wishing I was one of them, wishing I could just follow and disappear into the woods. I started watching the trail every day. It gave me something else to focus on, something calm. The noises at night were the worst. My parents yelling, things banging, glass breaking once or twice. I learned to tell when it was really bad by the tone of Mom's voice. I knew when she was just annoyed and when she was scared. I'd plug in my old MP3 player, stick in my earbuds, and let it drown them out. My room had one of those push-button locks, not super secure, but better than nothing. I locked it every night. My bed was under the window, headboard pushed against the wall. The draft would seep through in winter and make my pillow cold, even with the window closed. Still, it felt safer to sleep with my head toward the window and my back to the door. One night I went to bed like always. Lock clicked, earbuds in, window shut. I remember playing the same playlist I always did. A few video game tracks, some weird instrumental stuff I got from an older cousin. The volume wasn't even that high. I remember the fan on my desk spinning, making that soft hum. I had a glass of water on the nightstand, about half full. I remember all that clearly, but then it's just blank. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on my side, on wet grass. My face was cold. My shirt was soaked and stuck to my back. I tried to sit up, but my whole body felt stiff and wrong. My head throbbed like it was splitting open. Dirt was in my mouth. I coughed and rolled over, and that's when I saw the flowers. I was in the flower bed, the one under my bedroom window. The porch light flicked on a second later and someone shouted my name. Everything after that moved fast. Mom was screaming. Dad was barefoot, running down the steps and almost slipping on the lawn. I heard car doors slam. My eyes kept closing even though I didn't want them to. Next thing I remember clearly, I was in the ER, lights flashing past overhead as they wheeled me in. I had a concussion, scrapes down my arms and legs, bruised ribs. Nothing broken, but the doctor said I'd taken a hard fall. They asked me if I'd jumped. I hadn't. I didn't remember anything between lying in bed and waking up outside. The window was closed when I went to sleep. Closed and unlocked, but still shut. Dad said he found it open when they checked my room. The screen was pushed out and lying in the flower bed next to me. There was a little blood on it. Mom asked if I'd been dreaming, if I'd been scared, but I couldn't answer. I didn't know. I just felt tired and confused. The doctor said sleepwalking was likely, given the stress at home. He said it was rare at my age, but not unheard of, especially if I was trying to avoid conflict in the house. They latched onto that idea fast. It made them feel less guilty, I guess. Like it wasn't their fault. They installed window locks the next day, screwed in metal ones with a key. Dad put them on every window on the second floor, even the bathroom. They made me see a counselor in the next town over, someone who worked with kids dealing with trauma. I had to go twice a week at first. I never liked talking to her. She asked too many questions I didn't have answers to. She made me draw pictures of the house and how it made me feel. I drew a box with no windows and no doors. The weird part was the dream. It kept coming back every night for about a month. In it, I was still in bed, still wearing my headphones, and I'd hear someone call my name from outside. Just once. A man's voice, low, like it wasn't trying to wake me. Just remind me he was there. I'd sit up, look out the window, and there'd be nothing but trees. Still, I'd open the window and climb out like it was something I'd practiced. The fall never hurt in the dream. I'd land soft. Then I'd walk toward the trail without looking back. Looking back, I think maybe I was trying to run. Not in the way people mean when they talk about runaway kids, but something quieter. I never felt safe in that house. It never felt like mine. The dreams stopped, eventually. So did the sleepwalking, or whatever it was. But I never opened that window again. Not once. When I turned 14, things at home had gotten even worse despite my parents trying to work on their marriage through counseling. I'd started acting out at school, getting into fights and skipping classes, because I felt like nobody cared what happened to me anyway. Teachers called home, but the calls never seemed to change anything. I got detention twice in 1 week for mouthing off to a math teacher, and I didn't even care. At home, it was still the same endless loop of tension and yelling, especially over money. Dad accused Mom of hiding receipts, said she was lying about using credit cards. She threw a mug at the wall once, didn't even try to clean it up afterward. That Friday night after another shouting match where I heard him say something like, "I don't even know who you are anymore," I decided I'd had enough. It wasn't some dramatic decision. I just stood up, grabbed my backpack, and stuffed it with whatever I could find. Some granola bars, a nearly full water bottle, a flashlight I kept in my desk drawer. I didn't take much else. I wasn't planning to be gone forever, just long enough to make them worry. Long enough for them to realize they were pushing me away. I left a note on my bed, scribbled in pencil. "I'm safe. I just need space. Maybe now you'll notice me." Then I quietly left the house and started walking toward the trailhead. It was just after 5, still light out, and I figured I'd hike a bit, find a spot to sit, and come back once the sun set. Just enough to scare them. The trailhead was familiar. We'd hiked parts of it years ago, back when my parents still smiled at each other. I remembered some turns, a small wooden bridge, a tree stump shaped like a chair. I thought I could use those as markers to loop around and come back the way I came. But after about 2 hours, everything started to look the same. Pine trees, rocks, patches of ferns. I passed a junction I didn't recognize and figured I'd turn back after I saw the next big marker. I kept walking. I was trying to stay calm, but nothing looked right anymore. No wooden bridge, no stump. Just endless woods. About 4 hours in, the light started changing. The forest got quiet in that creepy way that makes every sound feel sharper. I checked my phone again. No bars. I turned around to retrace my steps, but every path looked like the one I just came from. I tried following my footprints, but the ground was too dry. I didn't know which direction I was even walking anymore. That's when panic started to creep in. I tried not to show it, even to myself. Just kept moving. But the more I walked, the more I realized I was completely turned around. When it got fully dark, I still hadn't found anything familiar. I didn't have a jacket, just a hoodie. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind made everything worse. I found a fallen log and crawled under it, using leaves and dirt to block some of the wind. Every crack of a branch sounded like an animal. I didn't sleep. I just laid there with my arms wrapped around my legs, teeth chattering. I kept thinking I saw lights through the trees, but when I looked again, there was nothing. A few times I thought I heard voices. Once I was sure I heard my dad shouting my name. But when I called back, nobody answered. By morning, I was out of water and too cold to think clearly. My fingers didn't want to move. My legs felt rubbery. I walked in a slow circle, trying to find the trail, but it felt like the woods were just closing in. Then I saw someone, a woman in a red coat, just ahead, looking my way. I shouted, stumbled forward, but when I blinked, she was gone. That's when I realized I was hallucinating. I sat down, afraid I'd pass out standing up. Not long after that, I heard real voices, crackling radios, people calling out names. A man in a high-visibility jacket appeared through the trees. The rescue team found me about 18 hours after I left home. They said I was lucky. One of them gave me his jacket and another checked my pulse. They put me on a stretcher even though I tried to walk. I kept asking if my parents were there. I wanted to know if they were scared or just mad. They told me my mom had been crying all night, that she was waiting at the trailhead. My dad too. I didn't know whether to feel good about that or not. In the ambulance, the paramedics said I was showing signs of hypothermia. My temperature was low, and I was barely making sense. I kept repeating things, mostly asking if anyone had seen the woman in the red coat. They said there wasn't anyone else, just me. The hallucinations were from cold and dehydration. I started shivering uncontrollably. They wrapped me in blankets, told me to stay awake. Back at the hospital, my parents were waiting. They looked different, tired, older. Mom hugged me so hard it hurt my ribs. Dad didn't say anything at first, just held my backpack, his hand shaking. Later that night, after I'd warmed up and had fluids, he sat by my bed and said, "We didn't know how bad it had gotten. We should have seen it." That night changed things. For once, they didn't just send me to a counselor and keep going with their own therapy. We started going together. Family counseling, every week. The therapist didn't let them talk over each other, and for the first time, I got to speak too. They didn't always like what I said, but they listened. Things weren't magically fixed, but they got better. They argued less. When they did, it was after I went to bed, behind closed doors. I got more involved in decisions, school stuff, even little things like what we had for dinner. They made space for me finally. I never went hiking alone again, not even close. The woods still make me uneasy. Too quiet. Too easy to get lost. I stick to sidewalks now. I don't care how familiar a trail looks. I know how fast that can change. When I was 16, my friend Lucas and I were deep into this survivalist phase. We weren't weird kids or anything, just really into YouTube videos where guys made spears and shelters with nothing but rocks and sticks. We wanted to try it ourselves, figured it'd be easy enough. There was this patch of woods on the edge of our neighborhood, stretching along the base of the Appalachians. Mostly pine and oak, with a few narrow dirt paths worn in from years of use. My older brother Jake had always joked about that area, saying it was cursed or haunted, some nonsense like that. I never believed him. He used it to scare me when I was younger, so I just assumed it was his way of keeping me away while he went out to smoke with his friends. Lucas had borrowed his dad's hatchet, a small steel thing with a rubber grip and a few rust spots along the blade. I had a canvas backpack filled with twine, a folding knife, and a couple of granola bars. We didn't go far in, just about 15 minutes past the last row of houses, where the trees started getting thick and the light barely touched the forest floor. The goal was to find strong, straight branches we could use for making spears and arrows. We had this idea that we'd craft them at home, maybe test them out later against cardboard targets. It was just something to keep our brains busy. We started picking through fallen limbs near a dry creek bed. There'd been a storm a few days earlier, and the ground was scattered with debris. Perfect for what we needed. Lucas was more serious about it, testing each branch by bending it and examining the grain, while I mostly followed him around, stuffing decent pieces into the backpack. We talked about school, video games, the usual. Nothing seemed off at first. A squirrel ran by, then a pair of blue jays screamed at us from a high branch. The forest was full of its usual noise, leaves rustling, bugs humming, birds chirping. Then something changed. It wasn't sudden, just gradual enough to be unsettling. The birds stopped. I noticed it when I paused to take a drink from my water bottle. There was no chirping anymore. No distant tapping of woodpeckers. Just the soft creaking of branches above us as a breeze moved through. I didn't say anything at first. Figured maybe they flew off somewhere. But then Lucas looked up from where he was kneeling by a half-buried log. "Dude," he said, barely above a whisper. It got quiet. I nodded. "Yeah." He stood up and looked around slowly. "You feel that?" "Like what?" "Like we're not alone." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Maybe it was the way he said it. He wasn't joking. I scanned the tree line behind us, expecting to see Jake peeking out or maybe one of his friends. But there was nothing. Just a wall of brown trunks and shadows. I told Lucas it was probably just the time of day. Late afternoon. Animals get quiet before evening. He didn't argue, but I could tell he didn't buy it. The wind picked up again, stronger this time. Pine needles rained down, and branches swayed above, creating moving shadows across the forest floor. It made the whole place feel like it was breathing. The deeper parts of the woods grew darker, like the trees were absorbing the light. Lucas turned back to the log and started cutting a decent-sized limb free. I kept glancing around, not really focused on what I was doing. I told myself Jake was probably hiding nearby, planning to jump out and scare us. It was the kind of thing he'd do. We moved to a clearing not far from the creek bed. It was maybe 30 feet across, ringed by tall, bare trees with broken branches scattered all around. The ground was soft and damp in places, probably from water pooling during the storm. It looked like a good place to find straight branches, so we spread out and started picking through the mess. I found one right away, about 4 feet long and just thick enough to hold its shape. I tested the bend, nodded to myself, and added it to the bag. Lucas was a few feet away, kneeling again, scraping bark off a branch with the hatchet. He paused, looked up, and squinted into the trees. "Did you hear that?" "No." He stared for a second longer, then shook his head. "Maybe nothing." I listened. Nothing moved. Just wind. No footsteps. No voices. No animals. I checked my phone. No signal. Not surprising out there, but it still bugged me. We kept working, trying not to talk much now. Every sound seemed too loud, like we were disturbing something. At one point, I saw a broken piece of what looked like a deer antler, half buried in the mud. It was snapped clean near the base, like it had been broken with force. I picked it up, turned it over, then dropped it again. Lucas stood up and turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. "I swear I heard something," he said, "like branches snapping." "Probably just a deer," I said. "Then where is it?" We stared at each other for a few seconds. I didn't have an answer. He dropped the branch he was holding and walked over to me. "Let's move," he said. "Let's just find a couple more pieces and get out." We stayed close after that, not splitting up again. I picked through a pile of branches while Lucas stood next to me, hatchet in hand, turning slowly every few seconds to look behind us. The shadows had stretched longer across the clearing now. The sun must have been getting low. I found a branch that looked promising, bent down to grab it, and that's when I noticed the footprint. It wasn't ours. It was older, pressed deep into the soft dirt. Not just one, two, maybe three, leading off toward the tree line. Boots, bigger than either of us would wear. The tread pattern was strange, like something you'd see on military gear. I froze. Lucas noticed my posture and followed my gaze. "Those yours?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" "No." He stepped closer, crouched to get a better look. "Looks fresh." We both stood up and looked in the direction the prints led, straight into the woods, opposite where we came in. The trees were too thick to see more than a few feet. Lucas turned slowly, then stopped. His hand went out in front of me, like a warning. There was a sound. Not loud, just a crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves. We froze. That's when I saw him. Just a flicker of movement at first, maybe 50 yards out, slipping between the trees. Dark clothing, crouched low, moving like he didn't want to be seen. I thought it might be a hunter at first, maybe someone tracking game, but he wasn't walking like a hunter. He wasn't following a path or moving steadily. He was darting from tree to tree, ducking behind trunks, glancing over his shoulder. It was twitchy and chaotic, like he didn't want anyone to know he was there, but also like he didn't know where he was going. Lucas saw him too. He grabbed my arm, tightening his fingers as he pointed silently toward where the man had ducked behind a wide oak tree. My skin was starting to prickle. The guy wasn't walking with any kind of gear, no bright orange vest, no rifle, nothing that made him look like he belonged out there. We both stood frozen for a second, just listening. Somewhere ahead, the underbrush cracked. Not steady footsteps, just short bursts of movement, then silence. Like he was stopping and starting, creeping along, unsure of the terrain. I turned slowly, trying to get a better look. Just as I did, the man reappeared, closer this time, maybe 30 yards away. He was half hidden behind a tree, angled so he could look at us without being fully visible. He was tall, lanky, maybe in his 30s, wearing a black jacket with something torn around the collar. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline, his head tilted slightly like he was studying us. Lucas whispered, "Why is he watching us?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. There was nothing friendly about the way he was hiding. We weren't lost. We weren't hurt. If he wanted to say something, he could have called out. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring, like he was trying to decide something. Then he moved again, faster this time. Still staying in the trees, but circling a little, not straight toward us, but definitely not away either. Like he was angling to intercept us if we started walking in a straight line. Lucas backed up and grabbed his backpack. "We need to go, now." I didn't argue. I slung my bag over my shoulder and followed him, moving quickly back toward the trail we'd come in on. We didn't run, not yet, but we picked up the pace. Behind us, the forest cracked and rustled in bursts. He was following, not charging, not yelling, just moving, always staying just out of view. Every time I glanced back, I caught a shape slipping between trees, a flicker of dark clothes, maybe an arm pulling behind a trunk. "Don't stop," Lucas said, breathing heavy. "Just keep going." When we hit the trail, we broke into a jog. Our shoes pounded the dirt path, and branches whipped at our legs. We didn't talk. We didn't look back much. We just moved. I kept expecting to hear him sprinting behind us, but he never did. Just those odd, irregular sounds. Too close, then too far, like he was playing some weird game of pacing us without catching up. I saw the road up ahead and pointed. There. We sprinted the last stretch. Our lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't stop until we were standing on the gravel shoulder, looking back toward the trees. Nothing. Just the quiet edge of the woods. Lucas bent over, hands on his knees, gasping. He didn't follow us out, I said. Lucas didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just, that wasn't right. The way he moved, it was like he was hunting. Like he wanted to trap us between the trees. We waited for his mom to show up, barely talking. Every time a branch swayed or a bird moved, I jumped. I watched the tree line, half expecting the guy to step out and just stand there again, but he never did. When the car pulled up, we got in fast and told her we were just tired. Nothing else. That night, Lucas texted me. We're not telling anyone yet, right? Right. I'm not going back there. Not ever. Same. We didn't talk about it at school. We didn't bring it up at dinner. But it was always there, sitting in the back of my head. That figure, half hidden, watching like he was waiting for the right moment to move. 2 days later, it showed up on the news. Police had captured a man hiding in the woods just outside town. He'd escaped from a minimum security prison about a week earlier, convicted of assault and battery. No murder charges, but enough to be on the run. The article said he'd been stealing from campsites, trying to stay under the radar while heading toward the interstate. Someone spotted him near an old gas station just outside the forest, and police picked him up without much of a struggle. They showed a picture of him being loaded into the back of a patrol car. Same black jacket. Same skinny frame. Same face I couldn't fully make out in the woods. They said he wasn't armed, but he was desperate and unpredictable. That explained a lot. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking for cover. And maybe, if we'd gotten closer, he would have decided to use us for something. Supplies. Maybe even our phones. Maybe worse. I didn't like thinking about it. Lucas and I texted after the news report. Just one exchange. You saw the story? Yeah. That was him, right? Definitely. We never went back to that patch of forest. Never even walked near it. I still hike sometimes, but not alone, and not without telling someone exactly where I'm going. Jake still jokes about that place, but I don't laugh anymore. His stories had more truth in them than we realized. There are people out there who don't want to be found, and sometimes they end up way too close. When I was 7, my Uncle Randy owned a cabin just off the Appalachian Trail in West Virginia. It was a long wooden structure with a tin roof, faded green paint peeling from the walls, and a wraparound porch that creaked when you walked on it. The driveway was gravel, and it snaked down through the trees until it opened into a clearing where the cabin sat. We'd park near the old stone fire pit that Randy had built himself, surrounded by those plastic lawn chairs that tipped if you leaned too far. Every summer, our whole extended family would pack up and head there for the last weekend in August. Cousins, aunts, grandparents, everyone showed up. The adults would drink and grill burgers, the kids would chase each other with sticks, and after dark, the campfire stories would start. Uncle Randy was always the center of it. He had this deep voice and a slow way of talking that made you hang on every word. He liked to tell stories about local legends, like the hermit who supposedly lived off squirrel meat and never came into town, or a mountain lion the size of a horse that only came out during thunderstorms. Most of the time, I got sent to bed before he got into the scarier stuff. I'd lie in the back bedroom, which had a tiny window that looked out toward the woods, and try to fall asleep to the sound of crickets and grown-up laughter. That night, the one I've never been able to forget, it was hot. One of those humid mountain nights where everything feels sticky. I had the window open and the sheet kicked down to my feet. The fire pit was still glowing outside, and I could hear my dad laughing at something Randy had said. Then, out of nowhere, I heard someone yell. It wasn't playful. It was sharp, like someone had been startled or pissed off. A second later, there was the sound of feet pounding the ground, and the cabin door flew open. My dad and Randy rushed in, both breathing hard and looking wide-eyed. Randy slammed the door behind them and twisted the old lock into place. They weren't laughing anymore. They stood there for a few seconds, both staring at the door. Then Dad let out this nervous chuckle and said something I couldn't catch. Randy responded, quieter, and they moved into the kitchen. I pressed my ear to the wall between the rooms, but I could only catch bits and pieces. Wasn't right. And shouldn't be out there. And not just drunk. Kept drifting through. Occasionally one of them would laugh again, but it was that kind of forced, dry laugh you hear when someone's trying to make a joke because they're freaked out. They stayed up for a while, voices low. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I woke up the next morning, everything was quiet again. Sunlight was coming through the little window, and the fire pit outside was cold and empty. People were already packing up. It was the last day of the trip, so that didn't seem too strange. But there was a weird energy around. No one was in a rush to chat or joke like usual. My dad was folding up a chair, and Randy was standing at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, looking into the woods. I walked up to them and asked what had happened the night before. Dad just smiled a little and said, "Some drunk guy stumbled into the clearing. Thought we were a ranger station or something. Gave us a good scare." Randy nodded, but he didn't say anything. His jaw was tight, and he didn't look at me. He kept scanning the trees like he was expecting something to come back. I stood there for a second, waiting for more, but no one offered it. On the drive home, I brought it up again. My mom just looked confused and said she hadn't heard anything. My dad cut in quickly and changed the subject to how much gas was left in the tank. When I pushed, he got annoyed and said, "I told you. Just some guy who got lost. Don't make a big deal out of it." Over the next few weeks, I tried to talk about it again, but my parents didn't want to hear it. Eventually, I gave up. What stuck with me, though, was how different Randy was after that summer. He didn't host the family weekend the next year, or the year after that. When someone asked, he'd say he had work, or that the cabin needed repairs. It was weird, because he loved those gatherings. He was the one who had started the tradition. One time, when I was about 10, we did go up there for a weekend. Just my immediate family. The place looked the same, but Randy acted different. As soon as the sun started going down, he made sure everyone was inside. He locked the doors and checked the windows like we were in a city. We sat inside playing board games with the curtains shut while the woods outside went quiet. I noticed he had put up new motion lights along the edge of the clearing. He didn't say anything about them, but they looked out of place. Bright white lights on tall poles facing the trees. When I asked if we could roast marshmallows like before, he said no, not this time. That he didn't want to attract animals. But I didn't see any wildlife that weekend. No deer, no raccoons, not even squirrels. Years passed. I'd ask about that night every once in a while, usually around a campfire with friends when we were sharing creepy stories. But whenever I brought it up to my dad or Randy, they'd shut it down fast. "Old story," Dad would say. "Nothing really happened." Randy would just shake his head and say, "You were a kid. You probably imagined most of it." But I knew what I heard that night. I knew the sound of real fear when I heard it. I knew they were hiding something. The few times we did visit the cabin, he made sure we were inside well before dark. Something about their behavior that night had always bothered me, but I figured it was just one of those adult things kids weren't supposed to understand. Randy looked bad when I saw him in the hospital. His face was thin and sunken, with an oxygen tube under his nose. The room smelled like bleach and something metallic. He barely had the energy to speak, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on me like he had waited too long to finally say what he needed to. I pulled up a chair and expected the usual. Family stories, maybe something about his time in the army or some long-lost friend. Instead, he went quiet for a bit, then said, "You remember that night at the cabin? The one when your dad and I ran inside?" I nodded, unsure where he was going. "I never told you what actually happened," he said. "We kept it quiet. Your dad didn't want you growing up scared." He paused to breathe through the oxygen. "But I've had that night playing over in my head for 25 years. He said they were sitting by the fire, just talking, when they started hearing twigs snapping from the direction of the woods. Not animals, not wind. Heavy, deliberate steps. At first, they assumed it was a bear, or maybe a big deer. They even grabbed a flashlight and stood up, trying to scare it off. Then, out of the trees, a man walked into the firelight. Or something close to a man. Randy said he was small, maybe 4.5 feet tall, wearing layers of torn clothes and a filthy coat tied with rope. His hair was long and tangled, his face smeared with dirt and something red that might have been blood. But the way he moved, Randy said it was wrong. His limbs didn't flow like normal. He jerked forward, stopped, then jerked again, like someone moving through water. Then he started shouting. Loud, garbled speech, some of it English, but mixed with words neither of them could recognize. It sounded like 2 or 3 different languages jumbled together. "You thieves," he screamed. "You bring fire. Burn my house. You steal land. My land." He was shaking a thick branch, maybe an old tree limb, held like a club. Randy said there was something unhinged in his face. He wasn't just angry. He looked like he was in another world. Randy's voice dropped to a whisper when he said this next part. "He came at us, just charged, no hesitation. Your dad yelled something, grabbed a chair. I picked up a beer bottle. We didn't fight. We ran." That guy was fast. They sprinted to the cabin, the man right behind them. Randy said he could hear the guys breathing, heavy and fast, like a dog panting. Rocks came flying past them, big ones. One hit a tree near Randy's head. They made it inside and locked the door. But it didn't end there. He circled the cabin, Randy said. All night. We heard him whispering, sometimes pounding on the walls, sometimes scratching at the windows. We didn't sleep. We sat there holding kitchen knives, waiting. The next morning, he was gone. But the damage wasn't. Deep scratches had been gouged into the wooden siding, long vertical marks like claws or a knife dragged slowly. Around the fire pit, Randy said there were symbols etched in the dirt. Circles, triangles, lines, all arranged like some kind of pattern. It didn't look like something a drunk guy would do. It looked ritualistic. Later, they found out who he was. The locals called him the Gnome. A Romanian immigrant who'd been living in the mountains since the late 70s, completely off-grid. People in the area talked about him, but no one really knew where he lived. Sometimes he came into town to steal food or supplies. A few old-timers claimed he'd set traps in the woods or threatened hunters who got too close. According to the sheriff, there were at least 4 reports from campers in the area who'd run into him, always at night, always near fire pits. One couple said he threw a rock through their tent and screamed at them to leave. Another group of hikers said he followed them for a mile, staying just at the edge of their flashlight beams. Randy said after that night, he couldn't look at the cabin the same way. He started checking locks obsessively, got motion lights installed. But it didn't help. He couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching. So he put the cabin up for sale. Quietly. Told people he was done with the mountain. He said my dad begged him not to talk about it again, especially not to me. When I asked him why now, after all these years, he just looked at me and said, "Because I don't want to die with it in my head." You deserve to know what kind of place that really was. He died 2 weeks later. I didn't say anything to the family. At his funeral, people talked about his storytelling, his sense of humor, his old army days. No one mentioned the cabin. No one mentioned what had happened there. A few months after Randy's death, I looked into it. Found an article online about a body discovered deep in the woods, near the Appalachian Trail. Unidentified male, estimated to be in his 60s, found in a makeshift shelter. Died from exposure. The description matched what Randy had told me. Small stature, layers of ragged clothes, long hair, signs of malnutrition. The shelter had been built from scraps, branches, old tarps. Inside were old cans, hand-carved tools, and drawings scratched into the walls. They never released a name, just listed him as another vagrant who didn't survive the winter. But I knew. It was him. The gnome. I haven't gone back to those woods. Don't plan to. Sometimes I think about that night. How close they came to something worse. How close I was, just a wall away, hearing all of it. The stories we keep from children might protect them, sure. But maybe it also makes them blind. I used to love the idea of the mountains, the quiet, the isolation. Now I just think about what might still be out there. I've been guiding hiking tours through the Appalachian Mountains for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of unprepared tourist imaginable. Last October, I was leading a group of 15 people on a 3-day trek to the Mount Rogers summit in Virginia. My partner Kevin and I always scout ahead on the final morning to check trail conditions before bringing the main group. We left camp at 5 a.m. to verify the eastern slope route where we planned to watch the sunrise. The temperature had dropped to just above freezing overnight, and thick fog made visibility almost zero. Kevin and I were using headlamps and staying close together as we navigated the familiar trail. About half a mile from our planned viewpoint, we heard someone moving through the brush ahead of us. At first, we assumed it was another early hiker, which wasn't unusual on popular sections of the Appalachian Trail. But when the person emerged from the fog, I immediately knew something was wrong. The man looked to be in his 40s, maybe older. His clothes didn't make any sense for the weather or location. A thin gray t-shirt, faded jeans, and beat-up sneakers that looked like they'd fall apart if they got wet. No jacket, no backpack, no supplies. His arms were tucked tight against his chest, and he was shaking like crazy. His lips had a bluish color, and his hands were stiff. I stepped in front of Kevin and asked, "Hey, are you all right?" He kind of nodded, but it didn't mean much. His eyes kept darting around like he was trying to remember something. "I've been walking... bus stop," he mumbled. His voice was low and cracked, slurred in a way that made the words blend together. 2 days. I just kept going. I looked at Kevin. We both knew that made no sense. The closest road was over 40 miles back, and even then, it was a service road only open part of the year. No way someone had come through that on foot without gear. The terrain was steep, rocky, sometimes dangerous. You don't just stumble in from a bus stop. I asked him where he started from. He said, Don't know. West, I think. Kept going up. Cold. He asked what state we were in. That made it worse. If you don't even know what state you're in, something's seriously wrong. Kevin whispered. Could be hypothermia, or something else. Yeah, I said. Or he's on something. We tried to steer the conversation toward getting him help. Told him we had a camp not far behind us, that we could bring him there, give him water, food, heat. He shook his head hard at first, then stopped and stared at the ground like he forgot what he was doing. Then out of nowhere he asked, "Is there anyone else with you?" That question set off alarms in my head. I glanced at Kevin again. We hadn't said anything about the group yet. We didn't know how long he'd been nearby or if he'd been watching. Maybe it was a lucky guess. Or maybe not. I told him it was just us. Just two guys checking the trail before sunrise. He kept staring at me like he didn't believe it. I added, "We've got extra jackets in our packs. You need to warm up." He took a small step forward, then stopped again. "You got any signal?" he asked. "I lost my phone. I had it, and then it was gone." "No signal out here," Kevin said. "Closest service is down by Grayson." He started breathing harder after that. Like just hearing the phone wasn't an option sent him deeper into panic. He rubbed his arms and kept repeating, 2 days. I kept going. I kept going. We stood there for another 30 seconds, maybe less. Kevin slowly unzipped his bag and pulled out an emergency blanket, tried to hand it over without making the guy feel threatened. The man didn't move to take it. He was staring at Kevin's bag now. At the gear. I took a step between them and said, "Let's just get you back to our camp. Fire's still going. You'll feel better there." He looked past me like he hadn't heard a word. Then without warning, he turned and bolted back into the fog. Just like that. No build-up. No goodbye. Just spun around and vanished between the trees. Kevin and I stood there stunned. I thought about chasing him, but quickly realized how dangerous that could be. The fog was too thick, and we had no idea if he was disoriented or leading us somewhere. We stayed quiet, listening. Heard branches cracking in the distance, then nothing. No footsteps. No voice. Just the damp quiet of the woods around us. Kevin said, "We can't leave him out here. He won't last another hour dressed like that." I nodded. We waited a minute to see if he might come back, then decided to follow in the direction he ran. But slow. Careful. We didn't want to walk into something blind. We moved about 30 feet into the woods, scanning with our headlamps. The fog made it hard to tell how far we were going. Everything looked the same after a while. Wet leaves, low branches, broken twigs. We called out, but there was no answer. Then Kevin stopped. He crouched down and pointed. A faint footprint. Just one, pressed into a patch of soft mud. It was the same tread we'd seen on the guy's sneakers. A bit further ahead, another partial print. The stride was uneven, and the direction didn't match any trail. Kevin whispered, "He's not heading anywhere that makes sense." We followed for another 10 minutes, always 10 or 20 feet between prints. They started veering left, down a slope that neither of us had used before. Not even during the off-season. I said, "If we go much further, we're gonna get turned around." Kevin nodded. "Give it 5 more minutes." We moved carefully. Every few steps we paused to scan and listen. The fog was starting to thin just a little as the sun began rising behind the clouds, but we were deep under tree cover and still mostly blind. Then we saw it. Something dark on the ground just ahead, maybe 20 feet. We approached slowly. It was a torn piece of fabric. A sleeve, Looked like it had been ripped off a t-shirt. Same kind of gray material the guy had been wearing. It was wet, stained with dirt, and clinging to a jagged branch on the ground. Kevin reached down to pick it up, but stopped when we heard a noise just behind us. It was quick, like someone shifting weight, breaking twigs. We both turned fast, light sweeping over trees and rocks, but saw nothing, just fog and forest. Kevin and I froze for a second. Whatever made that sound wasn't a small animal. It was slow, heavy, too deliberate to be wind. I turned my headlamp to full beam and scanned the trees behind us. Nothing. Just fog dancing in the beam and the sound of our own breathing. Kevin whispered, "We need to go back." I nodded. We'd seen enough, and more importantly, we didn't know what else was out here, or who. We made our way back up the slope, retracing our steps carefully to avoid slipping. Kevin glanced over his shoulder every few seconds. Neither of us said a word. When we got back to the main trail, we turned toward the direction of our camp, picking up our pace. About 10 minutes down, through a thinner patch of fog, I spotted movement on the trail. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, but it was him. He stood still in the middle of the path, arms hanging at his sides, staring at us as we approached. We stopped immediately. The man didn't say anything. I stepped forward slowly and said, "We've got a fire back at camp. Food. You should come with us." He tilted his head slightly. "Where's your camp?" he asked, voice calm but sharp. "Just down the trail," I said. "We'll help you warm up, and we'll figure out how to get you to a ranger station." He took a step forward. "I don't need help," he snapped. "I need you to tell me where your group is." That hit me like a punch. My body tensed up. "Why?" I asked. He glared at me. "I saw them. Yesterday. You got 15 people, right? 3 tents, 1 fire ring, and a blue cooler near the log pile." My stomach dropped. He'd been watching us. Somehow he'd tracked us without being seen. Kevin muttered, "He's been following us." I took a step back and put myself between the man and Kevin. "You need to leave," I said. "We're not giving you anything." He ignored me and turned to Kevin. "You got a jacket or not?" he said, stepping forward fast. Kevin reached into his pack and held out a jacket carefully. "Take it and go," he said. The man grabbed Kevin's arm when he handed it over. Tight. Too tight. Kevin winced and tried to pull away, but the guy wouldn't let go. "What are their names?" the man asked. "The girls. What are their names?" I moved in fast and shoved him hard in the chest. "Let go." He stumbled back a step but didn't fall. His eyes were wild now, and he didn't blink. "You don't get it," he said, voice rising. "You're not in charge out here. Nobody is." Then he turned and ran again. This time not into the woods, but directly toward the direction of our main camp. We knew exactly what that meant. I turned to Kevin. "He knows where they are." Kevin pulled out the GPS beacon and hit the emergency call button without hesitation. It would send our coordinates to the ranger station and trigger an urgent response. We didn't wait to see if it connected. We were already moving, fast, back toward our camp. Halfway down the trail, Kevin whispered, "We need to slow him down or warn the others." "There's no way to warn them in time," I said, "but we can track him. Just don't get too close." We moved as quickly as we could without making too much noise. Our boots hit the ground hard, but the fog muffled most of the sound. A few minutes later, we heard something crashing through brush off to our left. He was still close. Kevin pointed to a side trail that looped around toward camp. If we cut through there, we might intercept. We took the shortcut, jogging now, hearts pounding. Every noise sounded sharper. A distant branch breaking. Something splashing in a shallow stream. The fog was lifting in places, enough to make out tree trunks and paths. Then I saw a figure ahead, tall, hunched, moving fast through the brush parallel to us. I whispered, "He's heading right for the tents." Kevin radioed in on the handheld. "This is Guide Team A. Possible threat approaching group campsite. Repeat, possible threat. Male, unknown intent. Static." Then a voice. "Copy that. 2 Rangers en route. ETA 20 minutes. Maintain distance if possible." We slowed to a crouch near a tree line that overlooked the clearing where the group was still asleep. From behind cover, we saw him approach the perimeter. He moved low, trying to stay out of view. That's when we saw the knife. It wasn't huge, but in the low light, it caught a reflection. He pulled it from his pocket like he'd done it before. He crouched just 10 feet from the nearest tent. Kevin and I didn't wait. We moved out from the trees fast, staying in a wide arc. We didn't yell, didn't call out. We just made noise, enough to let him know he wasn't alone. The man froze, then spun toward the sound. He saw us and bolted again, disappearing into the woods on the far side of the camp. I radioed again. "Suspect heading east, away from camp, still armed. Rangers should be able to intercept." We stayed with the group after that. Got everyone up, moved them to a tighter area, and made sure they stayed in groups. A few of the hikers were confused, but we told them we had a wildlife issue and needed them to stay alert. 40 minutes later, 2 Rangers arrived. They didn't waste time. They took our statement, got our GPS logs, and headed east. Just under an hour later, they radioed back. They had him. Caught him a quarter mile from our site, trying to double back. He still had the knife, and a small black bag. Inside were plastic zip ties, gloves, and a folded map with markings near 3 different campsites along the trail. Turned out he was a registered sex offender, out on parole. Had skipped his check-ins and left his home state. Authorities confirmed he'd been living in the woods for at least a few weeks. They found a makeshift shelter a few miles off trail, stashed with canned food, clothes, and what looked like stolen gear. 2 of our group, college girls traveling alone, had pitched their tent on the edge of the site, right where he was headed. If we hadn't intercepted him, if we hadn't listened to our gut and pushed back when things didn't feel right, I don't want to think about what could have happened. Out here, paranoia isn't a weakness, it's survival. And sometimes, the scariest thing on the mountain isn't the terrain, it's the people. So when I was 19, my friend Ryan inherited his grandmother's Victorian house about 10 miles from the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. It was one of those big wooden houses with peeling white paint, faded green shutters, and a porch that wrapped around like it had something to hide. The place was built in 1887, and besides a kitchen remodel sometime in the 1950s, not much had changed. You could feel the age in every floorboard. Even when nobody was walking, the house made sounds, settling creaks, hollow thuds, and random groans from the pipes. I got used to it after a few weekends. Ryan's family used the place as a vacation home, mostly summer trips, sometimes for hunting season. He started going more often after his grandmother passed, mostly to clean and fix it up. I offered to help when I could. At first it was chill, paint touch-ups, clearing brush, fixing door hinges, stuff like that. We kept the tools in the old cellar, which always smelled like wet dirt and rust. Most of the rooms were full of outdated furniture, that weird plastic-covered upholstery type. Dust clung to everything. In the main living room, over the fireplace, hung a huge oil painting of a young boy on a rocking horse. It was one of those paintings that didn't really match the rest of the place. The kid looked stiff, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and the background was this muted tan with no details. The boy wasn't smiling, just staring past the viewer. The paint had aged badly. You could see cracks like a spiderweb across the canvas, and some bubbles had formed on the surface. One area near the boy's hand was flaking off. Ryan told me his grandmother always hated that thing. She'd apparently tried to get rid of it once, but was told by the previous owner it was considered part of the house's historic value. Sounded dumb to me, but Ryan just shrugged it off. I didn't think much of it either, just another creepy old detail in a creepy old house. That changed during one of my solo visits in early spring. Ryan had a family thing that weekend, but I went up anyway to do some basic work. I got there just before sunset, brought some food and a flashlight since the upstairs bathroom light didn't work. The living room was already dim when I walked in. That's when I noticed it. The paint bubbles on the boy's arm looked different. One in particular had changed shape. It wasn't random like before. It was sharp, narrow, and bent slightly at the end, almost like a blade. I leaned in closer and stared at it for a few seconds. Then I took a photo with my phone. The image came out blurry. I texted it to Ryan and asked if he'd seen that before. He replied an hour later. "Old paint, man. Temp changes cause weird stuff." I figured he was right. The house had terrible insulation, and the weather had been bouncing between warm and cold all week. I didn't really think about it much after that. I made some food, then spent the rest of the evening replacing a couple cabinet hinges in the kitchen. The following weekend, we both went up together. Ryan drove in late Friday, and I got there a bit earlier. I immediately checked the painting again. The bubble that looked like a blade was gone. Not deflated. Gone. Instead, there was a dark mark, like a smear or stain, exactly where the bubble had been. It didn't look like damage from humidity either. Just a faint discoloration right at the edge of the boy's hand. I asked Ryan if he noticed the dark patch. He said he hadn't really looked closely. I showed him the blurry photo I'd taken. He tilted his head, stared at the screen for a second, then shrugged. "Looks the same to me." That night, I couldn't stop glancing at the painting. Every time I passed the living room, I'd slow down just enough to glance up at the boy's face, his posture, the background. Nothing seemed to change, but I kept feeling like something was off. Not supernatural, just wrong. I eventually started taking more pictures of it, trying to track the bubbles. It was a stupid habit at first, just curiosity. But within a couple weeks, I had over 20 photos on my phone. Every time I visited, I noticed something different. One weekend, the bubble was on his knee, shaped like a crescent. The next weekend, it had moved to the rocking horse handle and looked like a thick rope. Each time, they flattened out by my next visit, always leaving behind those faint, dark stains. I even tried to capture a time lapse by setting up my phone overnight, but the battery kept dying. I brought an extension cord and charger the next time, but the video only caught shadows shifting, nothing definitive. By now, I was staring at that painting more than I was doing actual maintenance work. Ryan thought I was being weird about it. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell. One time he walked into the room while I was holding a flashlight up to the canvas, inspecting the lower corner where a fresh bubble had started forming near the kid's shoe. "You good, man?" he asked. I nodded and told him I was just checking for mold or something. He didn't push it, but I saw the look he gave me. Half amused, half annoyed. A few days later, I showed the photos to my cousin Max, who did some art restoration during college. He said the shapes were weird, yeah, but it wasn't unheard of for old paint to react like that, especially with poor humidity control. Could just be trapped air reacting to wood frame tension, he said. That made sense on paper, but the timing and shape consistency still didn't sit right with me. Why would the bubbles form such specific shapes? Ropes, blades, even what looked like a noose once. And why did they always vanish by the time I came back? I kept visiting every weekend, each time more focused on that one painting. I started checking it first thing when I arrived. On one visit in late May, I got there earlier than usual, around 2 p.m., and saw that a new bubble had started forming above the boy's left shoulder. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a coin, but it was sharp-edged, like a jagged shard curling outward. I took another photo, but again, the lighting made it useless. I dragged a lamp over and tried again, still not clear. That night, I set up a small LED work light to keep the room lit. I wanted to see if it would stop the changes. I even taped a piece of wax paper next to the canvas with a note that read, "Do not touch, monitoring paint damage," just in case Ryan came by without me. When I returned the next morning, the bubble had already shifted again, slightly downward and more rounded now. The wax paper hadn't moved. Nothing else in the room had. I reached out and gently ran my finger over the canvas. The surface felt dry and brittle, but the bubble area was slightly tacky, like fresh paint. A few months later, Ryan asked me to house sit for a week while he and his parents were out of town. I didn't hesitate to say yes, even though I hadn't stopped thinking about that painting. I brought some food, a flashlight, and my old baseball bat. I figured I'd just treat it like any other solo weekend, do some work around the house during the day, sleep with one eye open at night. The first day passed without incident. I fixed a loose stair tread, swept out the porch, and made some pasta for dinner. The painting still looked the same. Boy on a rocking horse, faint stains, a couple new hairline cracks, nothing obviously changed. It was the second night when things got weird again. I was watching TV in the living room, around 11 p.m., just some random show to fill the silence. Max, the family's golden retriever, lay curled near the couch. The wind had picked up outside, making the old wooden frames creak. I'd gotten used to that sound by now. But then I heard it. Slam, 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 slam. 4 loud door slams, coming from upstairs in rapid succession. Not one gust of wind, but like someone moving quickly through the hall and closing each door hard behind them. I sat up straight and paused the show. I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. All the bedroom doors were wide open, every single one, but I swear I had heard them slam shut. Max stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up, tail down. I checked each room. Nothing. I came back down and tried to brush it off. Maybe the wind had pulled them closed and they bounced open again. Old latches, uneven floors. But it didn't feel right. Later, as I was locking up for the night, I noticed Max standing still in the dining room, stiff, looking toward the basement window. He was whining softly, ears flat. I walked over and crouched beside him. The window was dark, reflecting the light from inside. But in the center of the glass, I saw what looked like a face. Round, small, with 2 eyes and a slight smile. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer. Then I saw it. It was the street light outside, casting branches and leaves onto the window in just the right way to create the illusion. I blinked, and the face vanished as a breeze moved the tree. Still, I took Max upstairs with me for the rest of the night. I ended up dragging blankets down to the living room and sleeping on the couch. I positioned myself so I could see the painting clearly. I wanted to stop worrying about it, prove to myself it was nothing. I even kept the flashlight right beside me. Max lay near the fireplace at first, but I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of low growling. I sat up fast. Max was standing directly in front of the painting, head lowered, hackles raised. It wasn't a playful growl. It sounded defensive. The canvas was warped, The bubbles weren't just bumps anymore. They were spreading across the surface in thick patches. The boy's face still looked the same, but the space around him was swelling. I turned on the main light. The image stayed the same, but now I could see that the bubbles had formed twisted outlines, shapes like hands reaching or faces caught in silent screams. In the light, they looked like damage, but I knew what I had seen in the dark. Max kept pacing, from the painting to the basement door and back. I opened the basement door and stood at the top of the steps, flashlight in hand. The smell was mustier than usual, but I didn't hear anything. No scurrying, no pipes, nothing. I shut the door again and put a chair in front of it. I didn't go back to sleep. I just sat there on the couch, baseball bat across my lap, watching the walls shift slightly in the drafty night air. First thing in the morning, I called Ryan. I told him what happened, about the slamming doors, the face in the window, Max growling, the bubbles forming shapes. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Yeah. Max has been acting weird around that painting for months. He growls at it sometimes. My parents think it's just the dog being old." Then he paused. "My grandma used to say the painting changed on its own. She swore it. My parents thought it was just dementia." I told him I was taking the painting down. He agreed immediately. We met that afternoon. Together we pulled it from the wall. It was heavier than it looked, and the frame was screwed into anchors. When we finally got it loose and set it on the floor, we both just stared at what was behind it. The plaster wall had a hole, about the size of a small dinner plate. Not just a crack, an actual cutout section, dark and deep. I crouched and looked in. The hole led into a space between the inner and outer wall, a cavity that ran directly down toward the basement. You couldn't see all the way, but you could feel the draft. And more than that, the edges of the hole were clean. Recent. The paint around it was slightly smudged, like someone had touched it over and over. We shined a flashlight into the hole and saw movement. Something shifted, then disappeared deeper into the wall cavity. We backed away, shut the basement door, and called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes. Officers searched the basement and found a broken window hidden behind a stack of old crates. In the crawl space beneath the house, they found sleeping bags, old cans of food, even a flashlight and a few torn pages from magazines. The cops finally located the man 2 hours later, thin, covered in dust, hiding behind insulation in the wall void. He didn't fight, didn't say anything. He'd been living there for weeks, maybe longer, coming and going through the broken window. At night, he'd climb up through the walls, using the cavity behind the plaster to spy into the living room through that hole. His breath and body heat had been warping the back of the painting, causing the bubbles and strange changes. The police said it was likely he'd been watching people for years, probably since before the grandmother died. No one knew how long he'd been there. They didn't find any ID. Ryan sealed the wall, threw out the painting, and replaced the window. I haven't gone back since. I still think about it sometimes. The way Max growled, the face in the window, the false logic we used to explain everything. We all wanted it to be something supernatural, because that felt safer than the truth. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you can't explain, it's what you finally can. The rain hit hard and early on Saturday. By noon, our clothes were soaked straight through, no matter how tight we cinched our hoods or adjusted our ponchos. The trail turned into mud. Roots we had walked over easily the day before were now slick and dangerous. I slipped more than once, and Emily rolled her ankle stepping down a rock incline, though she said it wasn't bad. We didn't talk much, just moved fast, heads down, trying to keep warm. Our pace slowed a lot more than we'd planned. The storm wasn't in any of the forecasts we checked before the trip. When we finally saw the shelter up ahead, it felt like relief. It was smaller than the last one, but had a solid roof and 3 wooden walls, open on one side to the trail. Smoke from a small fire outside told us someone was already there. As we got closer, I saw a man, maybe in his late 50s, stocky build, short beard, standing near the fire pit. He waved and smiled when he saw us. "You two look like you could use some warmth," he said. "I'm Frank. This is Dolores." Dolores was sitting inside on the wooden platform, bundled in a quilted jacket, her face partially shadowed under the hood. I nodded, introduced us, and we stepped into the shelter. Dolores stood up, holding out a hand. She had wiry gray hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, and she kept blinking a lot, face twitching slightly every few seconds. "I'm so glad you made it," she said, holding onto Emily's hand longer than necessary. "So rare to have company out here. Sit, sit, get warm." Frank was already adding wood to the fire. "Anniversary trip," he said over his shoulder. 30 years. Rain won't stop us." We shrugged off our backpacks, pulled off our wet layers, and set them near the fire to dry. Dolores had already laid out her stuff along most of the platform, but she began pushing things aside, motioning for us to sit right beside her. "Closer," she said. "You'll catch cold like that." Emily gave me a glance. I sat between them. Dolores kept talking about how she and Frank met, how this shelter had been here for decades, how beautiful the stars were on clear nights. She laughed a lot, too loudly, and touched Emily's arm every time she said something sweet or cute. Emily tried to be polite, but I could tell she was tense. Dolores never really looked at me directly when she talked, just focused on Emily like she was an old friend. Frank came back into the shelter as the rain started coming down harder, now loud enough to drown out our voices. He sat across from us, peeling open a pouch of freeze-dried chili. "Hope you two don't mind sharing," he said. "This place fills up quick when weather's like this." "It's fine," I said. "Thanks for the fire." Dolores leaned in toward Emily again. "It's just so lucky we all met," she said. "I was hoping we'd meet someone. You never know who you'll meet out here." We started boiling water for our own food, avoiding eye contact. I could see Frank watching us, eyes lingering a second too long. Not glaring, just observing. Dolores kept fidgeting with her jacket sleeves, tugging at the zippers on our packs, saying things like, "I used to have one like this," then letting go before we could respond. When we laid out our sleeping bags later, Dolores insisted we sleep close together. "It gets cold at night," she said. "Better to be near. Safer that way." We couldn't set up our tent. It would flood in this weather, so we didn't have many options. I nodded and unrolled our bags beside each other at the far end of the platform, with Frank and Dolores on the other side. Dolores watched the whole time, chin resting on her knees, rocking slightly. Night came fast. We ate in silence mostly, then turned in early. The rain still pounded on the shelter roof. I stayed half awake, listening. Sometime around midnight, I heard whispering. It wasn't clear, just low sounds. Then footsteps, soft, like someone trying not to wake us. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I felt a light touch near my foot, like someone brushing past. I opened my eyes a crack. Dolores was standing near our packs, her head tilted, holding something. Couldn't tell what. She stood there a moment, then turned and went back to her side. In the morning, we planned to pack and leave early. We didn't want to spend another night with them. Rain had eased a bit, and we just wanted to put distance between us and that shelter. Emily nudged me awake before dawn. "Let's go," she whispered. I sat up and reached for our gear, but one of our backpacks was missing. As the evening dragged on, the rain still hammering down outside the shelter, Dolores's mood began swinging wildly. She pulled out a bottle of cheap red wine from her pack and started drinking straight from it. Frank looked embarrassed but didn't stop her. She poured some into a metal cup and offered it to Emily, who politely declined. Dolores laughed too loud, saying, "You think you're better than me, huh?" She slumped against the wall and launched into a story about how she and Frank met in Vegas during a biker rally, then minutes later said it was a church retreat in Pennsylvania. The details shifted constantly. Sometimes they had 5 kids, sometimes none. Emily tried to steer the conversation to neutral topics, but it didn't help. When she asked how long they'd been married, Dolores froze mid-sip and stared hard at her. "Why?" she said. "You think it's strange? You judging us now?" "No, not at all," Emily said. "Just making conversation." Dolores started yelling, saying we were too young to understand real love. She launched into a graphic monologue about their sex life, throwing around personal details that made it impossible to look her in the eye. I stood up, pretending to check our gear, trying to distance myself from the whole scene. Frank tried to step in. "Dolores, maybe it's time to get some sleep." "Shut up, Frank!" she screamed. "You always do this. You always try to shut me down." She got up and kicked her sleeping bag across the floor. Then, like a switch flipped, she went completely quiet. Sat down. Started picking at her fingernails and humming a song I didn't recognize. Her eyes stayed on Emily the whole time. Unblinking. Sharp. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just social weirdness or too much wine. Dolores was unstable, and not in a harmless way. There was a pressure in the room that hadn't been there earlier, like something could snap at any second. We were trapped in this remote shelter, with no cell signal, no quick exit, and only 2 choices: sit it out, or risk hiking through dark, wet woods. We hoped she'd pass out soon, but the night had other plans. It must have been around midnight when I woke to the sound of someone sobbing. Dolores was sitting up in her sleeping bag, rocking back and forth. She was crying, then suddenly started shouting, "You poisoned it, Frank! You poisoned me! You want me dead!" Frank didn't move at first, but she kept yelling. "I know why you brought me here. I saw your emails. You took out a policy. You think I'm stupid?" I sat up. Emily was already awake, clutching her bag. Dolores suddenly pointed at us. "They're in on it too. You think I don't see what's going on?" "You're helping him." "No one's trying to hurt you," Frank said, barely audible. "You shut up!" she snapped, then turned back to us. "I've seen your faces before. You think I don't remember?" Then came the silence. She lay down, completely still, eyes wide open. For the next hour, she stared at us, not blinking, not talking. Her pupils didn't move. Emily gripped my hand tightly under our blanket. I didn't dare speak. I couldn't tell if Dolores was planning something or just lost in her mind. At one point, she started making these faint clicking noises with her tongue, then whispers, just out of range to make out the words. I kept thinking, if she stands up suddenly, what do we even do? Frank had turned over with his back to her, but I could see his eyes open. He wasn't asleep either. He was done trying, just enduring. Around 3:30, I whispered to Emily, "We're leaving." She nodded. We moved slow, carefully, packed everything silently. Emily's hands were shaking, but she didn't drop a thing. Dolores didn't move, didn't stop watching. When we stepped off the platform into the rain, she was still staring. We hiked maybe 15 minutes down the trail before veering off into the woods. I found a flat enough patch to set up the tent. Everything was soaked. The ground was soft and cold. But we felt safer instantly, even in the middle of wet darkness. We didn't talk much. Just zipped up the tent and lay there until the sky started to turn gray. By morning, the rain had slowed. We broke down the tent and got back on the trail, walking fast, barely stopping for water. When we passed the shelter again mid-morning, it was empty. No sign of Frank or Dolores. But there was trash everywhere. Wine bottles, food wrappers, a torn plastic tarp. That afternoon, we ran into a group of hikers heading in the opposite direction. I warned them about what happened, described the couple. One of them, a guy in his 40s, frowned and said, "We ran into them last year. Same thing. She went off on one of our group, claimed we were spies." We later heard from a ranger at the trail exit that they'd received multiple reports about the same couple. Harassment, screaming, accusations. But unless a serious crime was committed, they couldn't remove them. It was public land. Frank, they said, never filed anything formal. Just kept showing up year after year, dragging her along. People figured he was in over his head, or maybe just resigned. We never saw them again. But I still think about what could have happened if we'd stayed one more night. If we'd waited too long to leave. The wilderness is supposed to be peaceful. But the scariest part wasn't the weather, or animals, or getting lost. It was sharing 4 walls with someone who looked at us like prey. So when I was in high school back in 2011, I lived in this small mountain town right off the Appalachian Trail. It was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, and nothing big ever really happened. My dad worked at the sawmill on the east side of town, and I had pretty much planned to go straight there after graduation. It wasn't something I was thrilled about, but it was expected. We weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of options either. Our house sat near the edge of the woods, close enough that you'd hear owls at night and occasionally a coyote if the wind was right. We didn't lock our doors much, not because we were careless, but because there wasn't really anyone around to be scared of. Or so we thought. I had always been a light sleeper, but during senior year it turned into full-blown insomnia. I'd lie in bed for hours, listening to the sound of the fridge cycling on and off downstairs, or cars crunching over gravel far off down the road. My mom tried everything. Chamomile tea, taking my phone at night, even rubbing Vicks on my chest. Nothing worked. One night in May, I finally drifted off around 3 a.m. I remember checking the clock, just watching the red numbers click over. I don't usually remember my dreams, but that night I had a nightmare that still burned into my brain. I was walking into the school locker room, the one by the gym, with the flickering overhead light, and there was this girl standing by the sinks. She had long black hair and was wearing a white dress, soaked like she'd been in the rain. She was crying quietly, but not moving, just standing. I tried to talk to her, but when she turned around, her eyes were just empty sockets. Not bloody or gory, just gone. I jolted awake in the dark. My bedside lamp had burned out and everything was pitch black. I sat up and looked toward my chair where I had thrown my hoodie and jeans. But in the shadows, they looked like a person sitting there, just staring at me. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually I reached over and flicked on my flashlight. Just clothes. I laughed to myself, but my hands were still shaking. The rest of the school year passed like a blur. I didn't tell anyone about the dream, just brushed it off. I figured it was just stress, or too many horror movies. After graduation, I got the job at the mill like planned. It wasn't exciting, but it paid enough, and it kept my parents off my back. But the sleep problems didn't go away. If anything, they got worse. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving just out of reach. I'd be sitting on the couch watching TV and swear someone walked past the hallway behind me. But when I looked, nothing. I'd get up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, and the living room would feel wrong, like someone had just been there. Once, I walked in and found the TV on with the volume muted, even though I'd turned it off before bed. My mom told me it was just the stress of starting real adult life. She blamed all the Appalachian Trail hikers that came through town for making me paranoid. Too many strangers wandering around, she said. You're just not used to it. I wanted to believe her. I really did. So I told myself I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks on me. The mill shifts were long, and the noise from the machines never really left your ears, even when you got home. 2 years later, I moved in with my girlfriend, Sarah. She worked at the diner in town and did night shifts pretty often. Her apartment was small but clean, 2 rooms and a kitchenette. I thought maybe the change would help, that being with someone else would calm me down. For a little while, it did. But then it started again. The shadows, the weird sounds, especially on nights when Sarah wasn't home. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, sure that someone was standing beside the bed. I'd snap on the lamp, and nothing. Just the quiet hum of the fridge and the wind outside. Sometimes I'd get up and check the door, still locked. Windows closed. Nothing moved. One time, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up and saw a shape standing near the dresser, not moving, just a silhouette in the dim light from the street lamp outside. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then I blinked and it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sarah started to notice. She'd find me asleep on the couch with all the lights on. Or wake up and I'd be standing by the window, just staring out into the dark parking lot. I told her I couldn't explain it, that something felt off. She started keeping a flashlight under her pillow. Not because she believed me, but just in case. I think part of her thought I was sleepwalking, but I wasn't. I never was. One night, she came home late after a double shift. I had already gone to bed, but I woke up when I heard her keys in the door. I remember looking at the clock, 1:17 a.m. She came in, kicked off her shoes, and went straight to the bathroom. I got up to greet her, but when I stepped into the hall, I froze. The bathroom light was on, the door slightly open. I could hear the tap running, but the apartment door was still locked with the chain on. I walked over and peeked into the bathroom. It was empty. Just steam from the hot water running into the sink. No sign of Sarah. I turned around and the living room was dark again. I hadn't heard her leave. I hadn't heard anything. I checked the bedroom. She wasn't there either. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, listening. Then the front door unlocked. The chain rattled. And Sarah walked in, holding a bag of takeout and her phone. She looked at me and said, "Why's the bathroom light on?" Sarah and I got married in 2018. We kept things small, just a courthouse ceremony and dinner with her family afterward. I remember barely staying awake during the meal. By then, I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, tops. She knew something was wrong, but I kept brushing it off. Said it was the job, or the house, or the wedding stress. But the truth was, I was scared all the time. Not of something happening, but of what I might see if I closed my eyes too long. I started changing my routes home. Even though it added 20-30 minutes, I'd take the long loop through town instead of cutting through the back roads by the Appalachian Trail. There was one stretch near a switchback where the woods thinned out, and you could see a drop-off down into the ravine. That's where I first saw her again. Same woman from the dream back in high school. White dress, long dark hair. She was walking along the guardrail, barefoot, staring straight ahead. It happened more than once. Always on that same stretch. Sometimes she was closer to the road, sometimes farther off near the trees, but it was always her. I didn't tell Sarah at first. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. I didn't even tell her when I almost crashed trying to swerve because I thought she stepped into the road. The worst part was, it stopped being just a nighttime thing. I'd be driving to work, full daylight, sun shining, radio on, and suddenly she'd be there, in the rearview mirror. Not always clear. Sometimes just a flash of white or a reflection that didn't match anything around me. But enough to make my hands shake so bad I had to pull over. I'd sit on the side of the road with the hazards flashing, waiting for the panic to stop. Some days I'd be late for my shift, and I'd lie to my boss, say there was construction or traffic. I just didn't want to admit I was scared of a road, of something I couldn't even prove was real. Sarah started pushing for me to see a doctor. She thought maybe it was stress or PTSD from something I hadn't talked about. I told her I'd make an appointment, but I never did. Deep down, I was scared they'd lock me up or put me on pills that would make things worse. So I kept quiet, kept working, kept pretending everything was fine. Then in December 2022, it got worse. I was driving home from a double shift. Snow had started falling around midnight, and the roads were slick. I didn't want to take the mountain route, but the other road was closed off for maintenance. So I took the bridge near the trail parking area. The bridge is old, just metal grating and a single lane. You have to go slow and honk before you cross. I'd always hated that spot, even before everything started. This night, I was halfway across when I saw her, standing dead center in the road. No movement, no reaction. Just standing there. I slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded a bit on the wet grating, but I stopped in time. I sat there, engine humming, lights aimed right at her. I couldn't see her face, but it looked like she was staring at the windshield, not blinking, not moving. I didn't get out, didn't honk. I just froze. Then, from the other side, a semi came roaring toward us. It hit the bridge fast, and the metal screamed under its weight. The whole structure shook. My headlights flashed as the truck passed me. In that moment, everything blurred. When it cleared, she was gone. The spot where she'd stood? Just a tipped-over plastic barrel. One of those trailhead trash cans, blown into the lane by the wind. My brain had taken a barrel and turned it into a woman. Or maybe the woman had never been there at all. I couldn't tell anymore. I sat there another minute, trying to breathe. My heart was pounding, hands slick on the steering wheel. Then I eased forward, slow as I could, and finished the drive home. I didn't tell Sarah what happened. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't trust myself. After that night, I avoided the bridge completely. Took longer shifts at the mill to make sure I got home during the day. I kept the lights on in every room. Sometimes I slept in the car just so I wouldn't be alone in the dark. Last month, I finally cracked. Woke up in the kitchen at 3 a.m., still in my work boots, hand on the knife drawer. No memory of getting up. That's when I made the appointment. Dr. Martinez at the county health center. She listened, didn't interrupt, just asked questions and wrote things down. I told her everything. The dream, the shadows, the woman, the bridge. How it never stopped. How I felt like I was going to fall apart if I closed my eyes. She didn't look shocked. She said I had chronic anxiety made worse by years of sleep deprivation. That when the brain doesn't get rest, it starts to fill in the blanks, makes you see patterns where there aren't any, turns shadows into people, barrels into ghosts. I asked her if that meant I was crazy. She said no. It meant I was human, and I needed help. She gave me medication and scheduled therapy sessions, told me to take 2 weeks off work, to sleep, to let my brain reset. Sarah's been amazing through all of it. She moved the bedroom to the front of the apartment where the streetlights are brighter, got blackout curtains for the other windows, sits with me when I wake up panicked, never once told me to tough it out. We're planning to move closer to town now, somewhere with more light, more neighbors, less isolation, maybe a place with no view of the woods. I still avoid the bridge, still won't drive that stretch of road. I'm writing this because I know some of you live out in the mountains, away from everything. It gets quiet out here, too quiet. And if you're not sleeping, not eating right, not talking to anyone, it can mess with you. You start seeing things, hearing things, thinking it's just you. Don't wait like I did. Talk to someone. Get help. Before your mind turns the dark into something worse. The weirdest part is how normal the beginning was. I mean, we were just a bunch of teens trying to soak up the last bit of summer before school started. Mike, my buddy since middle school, had this whole trip planned for months. He'd gotten the idea from his older brother who'd done some Appalachian Trail hikes the year before. The spot wasn't deep in the woods or anything, just a legal camping area near Shenandoah with a small parking lot, fire rings, and plenty of flat ground to pitch tents. You could hear the occasional car on a road not too far away, so it didn't feel remote. We all drove down in 2 cars, loaded with cheap gear from Walmart and a cooler full of food. There were 5 of us: Mike, me, Dave, Lenny, and Trevor. It was late August, hot during the day but with a decent chill at night. We set up our tents around 6:30 p.m. on Friday. The sun was still up, but already casting that long golden light through the trees. I remember the way it hit the side of Mike's tent, like the whole thing was glowing. Dinner was hot dogs on sticks and some pasta Trevor tried to boil. Mostly we just sat around the fire talking about school, college applications, and which teachers to avoid. Nothing exciting. I felt relaxed in a way I hadn't for weeks. The air was cleaner than back home. Everything smelled like pine and smoke. It was quiet except for crickets and the occasional crack from the fire. We didn't stay up too late. Mike wanted us to hit a trail the next morning, so by 11 p.m. we all turned in. I shared a tent with Lenny, and I was out cold within minutes. I didn't even wake up once that night, which was rare for me. Usually, I tossed and turned when sleeping anywhere that wasn't my own bed, but not this time. I think it was the mix of fresh air and mental exhaustion. The next morning started off pretty smooth. We got up around 8:30, made coffee and scrambled eggs on the camp stove. Mike pulled out this laminated trail map he'd brought, showing all the nearby loops and access points. The one that caught our eye was a short stretch of the Appalachian Trail that led to a waterfall. It was only a mile and a half out, clearly marked, and the elevation didn't look too rough. Perfect for a morning hike. I was already getting antsy, just standing around waiting for the others to finish packing up. I figured I'd go ahead to the waterfall and come back before they were done. I didn't plan to be gone long, 3 miles round trip, maybe a bit more if I took it slow. I told Mike I was heading out. He nodded, checked his watch, and said, "It's 11:20. Be back by 12:30 at the latest." I remember glancing at my own watch to double check. Same time. The trailhead was just past the parking area. There was a wooden post with a faded white blaze and a directional arrow pointing east. I adjusted the straps on my backpack and started walking. The first part of the trail was super easy, almost flat. The dirt path was packed down hard, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Ferns lined the edges, and every now and then you could see boot prints or bike tracks in the mud. I passed a couple coming the other way about 5 minutes in. They nodded politely, and I stepped off the trail for them. About 10 minutes in, the trees got denser, and the light dropped a bit. The canopy overhead was tight, filtering out the sun. The trail stayed obvious though, still wide, still marked every 50 feet with those white painted rectangles. I didn't bring earbuds or anything, so I just walked and listened to the wind and the occasional bird. I stopped once to drink some water and take a picture of a weird mushroom growing on a log. Nothing felt off yet. I saw a squirrel dart across the trail, and once I heard something bigger crashing around in the underbrush, maybe a deer. It was quiet, peaceful. But at some point, I started to notice something was, I don't know, a little too quiet. There were no other people, no distant voices, no airplanes, no cars. Just trees and silence. I checked my watch. It was 11:50, so I figured I had maybe 10 more minutes until the waterfall. I sped up a bit, just wanting to get there, snap a photo, and turn around. That's when I noticed a break in the trail. A small clearing to the right, not part of the main path, but worn enough that it had clearly been used. There was no marker, but it curved down slightly, like it might loop back. I hesitated. The main trail kept going straight, but I was curious. I walked maybe 10 feet down the offshoot before stopping. There were some beer cans in the dirt, and a ring of blackened rocks like someone had made a fire pit. Nothing recent though. No trash, no footprints. Just quiet. I turned back toward the main trail. That's when I heard it. Not a loud sound, but a deliberate one. A twig snapping. Close. Maybe 10 yards behind me, off the trail, not in the direction I'd just come from. I froze and turned my head slowly. At first I didn't see anything, just dense trees and shadow. Then I noticed a shape. Someone standing still, mostly hidden behind a tree. They weren't moving, but they weren't hiding either. Just watching. I squinted, trying to make out a face. They had a dark hoodie pulled up and were facing me, but slightly turned like they'd just stepped out from cover. I waited for them to say something, but they didn't. I raised my hand, gave a small wave. "Hey man, trail's this way," I said, motioning back toward the main path. No response, no movement. Just standing there, watching. I didn't like that. My heart rate picked up, but I kept my face neutral. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the figure. Once I hit the main trail, I turned and started walking fast. Not running, but fast enough to put distance between us. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop to check either. I just kept moving. The trees were getting thinner again, and I saw a sign up ahead. It was a wooden arrow nailed to a tree that read, "Falls, 0.3 miles." I kept going. The hike to the waterfall was easy from there. The last stretch was a bit rocky, but the trail was still clearly marked and dry. I reached the falls in about 20 minutes. It wasn't huge, more like a wide curtain of water spilling down a 10-foot ledge into a shallow pool. Still, it was pretty, and the sound of the water made the woods feel alive again. I took a few pictures with my phone and stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just watching the sunlight shimmer on the water. I didn't see anyone else around the falls. No voices, no hikers. I figured the others would probably be wrapping up camp by now, so I turned around and started heading back. The walk uphill took a little longer, maybe 25 minutes. I didn't stop. No breaks, no detours. The trail looked the same. Nothing had changed. I kept checking for those white blazes just to be sure. Same turns, same logs, same muddy patch where my boot had left a print earlier. As I got closer to camp, I could see the edge of our tents through the trees. Everything looked normal. The sun was still fairly high, casting short shadows. I checked my watch again. 12:15 p.m. That made sense. Just under an hour, round trip. I felt good, relaxed even. I picked up my pace a little and stepped out of the woods into our clearing. The second I stepped out, Mike and Dave were sprinting toward me. Mike had his phone in one hand, and his face was pale. "Where the hell have you been?" he shouted. "We've been yelling for you." He grabbed my arm, looking me over like I'd been attacked or something. I looked at him confused. "I went to the waterfall. I told you I was going. I got back a few minutes early." Mike looked at his watch, then held it up to my face. "It's 2:30, man. You've been gone over 3 hours." That stopped me cold. I looked at my own watch. 2:30. I blinked. No, that can't be right. I left at 11:20. It's only a short hike. I was back by 12:15. I said it with full confidence. My legs didn't even feel tired. I hadn't sat down. I remembered the walk, the turn, the waterfall, every step back. Trevor joined us, shaking his head. "Dude, we thought you were lost. We've been up and down the trail yelling your name for over an hour." We were about to drive to the ranger station. I told them everything I could remember, every part of the hike, every turn I took. I even showed them the photos on my phone, time-stamped at 11:45, right at the falls. But after that, nothing. No pictures on the return hike, no texts, just a weird empty space in the timeline. I had no sense of missing time, no headache, no dizziness. Nothing felt off until they said the time. They told me they'd walked a good half-mile down the trail, shouting. Mike said he thought he heard something once but couldn't place it. They assumed I'd kept going past the falls and gotten turned around. But I hadn't. I was sure of it. I retraced my steps perfectly. Nobody knew what to make of it. Dave suggested maybe my phone's clock had bugged out, or my watch battery was glitching. But both mine and Mike's watches showed the same time. That was the part that stuck with me. If it was just my own watch, I could blame a battery. But two? We didn't really talk much after that. Just packed up and left. The mood had shifted. I could tell they were all a little freaked out. So was I. The drive back was quiet. Mike drove, eyes straight ahead. Nobody played music. When I got home, I told my parents I'd had a great time. Didn't mention the time gap. Didn't want them worrying or banning future trips. That night, I stayed up way too late Googling everything I could. Time loss, trail disappearances, medical causes. The rational side of me figured it had to be something simple. Maybe I zoned out. Maybe dehydration. I hadn't drunk much water during the hike, and the sun was stronger than I thought. But the part I keep coming back to is how normal everything felt. No disorientation. No memory gaps. I remember standing at the waterfall. I remember walking back. No blurs. Just a normal hike. Still, over 2 hours were missing. I've gone back to the Appalachian Trail a dozen times since then. I always stick to marked routes. I carry extra water. I check in constantly. Nothing like that has ever happened again. But I still think about it. Every time I pass a side trail or see someone step just off the path, I get this tight feeling in my chest. I look at my watch more than I need to. I always keep track of when I leave, when I get back. I've never lost time since. But I still remember the look on Mike's face when I came out of the trees. Like he was sure I'd vanished. Like he'd been just minutes away from reporting me missing. And the worst part is, maybe he should have. Because whatever happened in those lost hours, I still have no answer. Just a memory of a normal walk, and a clock that doesn't match. Last October, I decided to hike up to Bear Ridge to photograph the fall foliage at peak color. I packed my camera gear and headed out early morning on a trail I'd walked probably 50 times before. The air was crisp, just under 50 degrees, and I had on my usual flannel jacket, hiking boots, and a small backpack with water, snacks, extra batteries, and my Canon DSLR with a 70-200mm lens. The trailhead was about a 15-minute drive from my house, so I got there just after sunrise, parked at the gravel pull-off, and started up the main path. This trail winds through mostly hardwood forest with a few thick pine stands, and in October the leaves turn gold, red, and deep orange. It's one of the best spots in our area for fall shots. I had a few favorite spots marked on my GPS from past hikes, ridge clearings and natural overlooks that framed the valley perfectly. The hike wasn't hard, just long, about 6 miles round trip. I planned to take my time, stop at a few of those spots, maybe eat lunch at the summit, then head back before dark. I saw a few hikers coming down as I was going up. Most of them were older couples or solo walkers with trekking poles, the usual folks I'd expect this time of year. Everyone nodded or said hello, nothing out of the ordinary. About halfway up, the trail forked, and I took the steeper route that cut through thicker forest. It was quieter there, no wind, just the sound of squirrels and the occasional bird call. I walked slowly, scanning for photo opportunities. About 2 miles up the trail, I saw movement in the thick underbrush off to my left. At first, I thought it might be a deer, or maybe a black bear, so I stopped and got my camera ready. Instead, I saw a tall figure in dark clothing moving through the trees about 100 yards away. It was definitely human, but something about the way the person moved seemed off. Very deliberate and cautious, like they were trying not to be seen. Most hikers on the Appalachian Trail wear bright colors and make noise to avoid surprising wildlife. This person was dressed in muted colors and moving almost silently through the forest. They were tall, maybe 6 feet or more, and wore a black hoodie with the hood up, dark pants, and what looked like a large backpack, but I couldn't make out any other details. They weren't on the trail, which struck me as odd. They were weaving slowly through the trees, stopping behind trunks and scanning the area before moving again. I crouched slightly and raised my camera, using the zoom to get a better look. Even through the lens, the figure was just shadows and motion, no clear features. My first thought was maybe they were a hunter, but hunting season hadn't started yet, and no one in our area hunts that close to a public trail. Then I wondered if they were lost or avoiding someone. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow at a distance to see if they needed help or were doing something suspicious. I moved off the trail quietly, trying not to step on twigs or crunch leaves. I kept the person in sight but stayed far enough back that they hopefully wouldn't notice me. The forest floor sloped downward in that section, and footing got trickier with loose rocks and roots. I slipped once, caught myself against a tree, and paused. The figure had stopped too. They were crouching now behind a fallen log, partially hidden by ferns and brambles. They weren't facing me, so I crept a little closer, maybe 20 more yards, and raised the camera again. Still no clear view. Just that same hunched shape and that dark backpack. Then I noticed something else. There was a second person farther up the slope, leaning against a tree, watching the first one. This second person wore jeans, a gray jacket, and no backpack. They had something long in their hands, maybe a walking stick, maybe something else. They weren't hiding. They stood still, arms crossed, just watching. Neither of them said anything. It didn't look like they were together, but they were definitely aware of each other. The tension in that scene hit me like a wave. Something wasn't right. I stayed crouched and barely breathing, trying to decide whether to back off. Before I could move, the first figure stood up and walked briskly toward the second, not rushed, but with purpose. The second figure didn't move at first. Then, just as they were about 10 feet apart, they both turned and looked down slope, right in my direction. I froze. I was pretty sure they couldn't see me through the brush, but their heads angled down exactly toward where I was kneeling. I ducked behind a tree, held my breath, and stayed as still as I could. After maybe 15 seconds, I heard fast, light footsteps moving away through the forest, deeper into the trees. I waited another full minute before peeking around the trunk. The clearing was empty. Both figures were gone. I scanned the area again through my lens, but saw nothing. Just trees, ferns, and shadows. I stood up slowly, still crouched, and backed up the slope to the trail. I didn't hear anything else. No voices, no movement. Once I reached the trail again, I stopped and looked around. Everything looked normal, quiet, untouched. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Two people, meeting off trail, one carrying something, the other crouching and sneaking through the woods like they didn't want to be seen. I kept going up the trail, but a lot slower than before, stopping every 100 feet to listen. My hands were shaking a little, and I kept my camera ready in case I saw anything else. I tracked the figure for about half a mile deeper into the woods, well off any marked trail. The terrain started to get rough, steep inclines, uneven footing, fallen logs everywhere. But the person moved like they'd walked that path 100 times. I kept my distance, always trying to keep a tree or rock between us. Every so often, I'd lose sight of them for a few seconds, and then catch a flash of dark clothing again as they moved ahead. They weren't looking back, just pressing forward with this strange purpose, like they had a destination and a schedule. Eventually, they disappeared behind a large outcropping of rocks near a shallow creek. I waited a minute before following, trying to keep my steps light. When I reached the other side of the rocks, I saw something I didn't expect. Tucked into the root system of a huge pine tree was a makeshift shelter. Tarps were tied between trunks and low branches, forming a kind of lean-to. There were plastic containers set out to collect rainwater, stacked firewood in a crude rack, and a beat-up camp chair by a blackened fire pit. The setup wasn't new, but it looked lived in. Not like someone camping for a weekend, more like someone who'd made a long-term home here. There was a torn backpack propped against a tree, and some kind of cooking pot hanging from a branch. I crouched and looked closer. In the mud around the shelter, I saw fresh footprints. A single trail, boots that matched the direction I'd seen the figure go. The prints were deep and clear, heavier steps, not from someone just passing through. The air smelled like wood smoke. Not old smoke, recent. I touched the fire pit, and the ash was still warm. Whoever this was, they had been here maybe less than an hour ago. I scanned the trees again, but saw no one. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds had gone still. I stepped toward the shelter and noticed other signs. Wrappers from canned food, an empty medicine bottle, a small stack of damp newspapers. Some of the tarps had holes patched with duct tape. Whoever built this had been surviving out here for a while, maybe even through the winter. I took a few photos with my phone, not for curiosity anymore, but in case something happened. The whole thing was starting to feel wrong. Not illegal exactly, but not right either. Then I heard it, branches snapping, close behind me. I turned fast and saw a man standing just inside the tree line. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, but his face was so weathered he could have been older. His clothes were layers of old jackets, pants tied at the waist with a rope, and mismatched gloves. Everything about him looked worn down. His beard was long, gray-streaked, and matted. His eyes were dark, and sunken, and he was thin, like bone thin under all those layers. We both froze. He stared at me like he couldn't believe I was real. Then he started shaking his head quickly and backing up, his hands making wild gestures. I raised my hands slowly and said, "Hey, I don't mean any harm. Are you okay? Do you need help?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. He kept muttering something under his breath, nothing I could understand. Maybe not even words, just sounds. I tried stepping forward slowly, but the moment I moved, he let out this yell, more fear than anger, and turned and bolted into the underbrush. For a guy who looked half-starved, he moved fast. I lost sight of him almost immediately. I shouted after him, "I'm not going to hurt you. You don't have to run." But there was no response, just the rustle of branches closing behind him. I waited there for a long time, listening. Eventually, I realized he wasn't coming back. I circled the shelter once more, took a few more photos, then started the hike back. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way, thinking maybe he'd follow or I'd run into him again. But the woods were quiet. Too quiet. Not even squirrels this time. When I got back to town, I went straight to the local social services office. It's a small building next to the town hall, and I knew one of the caseworkers from a photography project I did on local families last year. I told her everything. What I saw, where it was, what the man looked like, how he acted. She took notes and said they'd send someone to check it out. She asked if I'd be willing to take them to the site, but I said I'd rather not. I was still shaken up. A week later, I went back up there. I don't know why. Maybe to see if he was okay, maybe just to convince myself I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But when I got to the spot, the shelter was gone. Completely dismantled. No tarps, no containers, no firewood, no backpack. Even the footprints were gone, smoothed over or washed away by rain. It was like no one had ever been there. I took some photos of the empty clearing, then hiked back down. I stopped by the social services office again and asked if they'd found anything. The woman I spoke to looked confused. She said the person they sent couldn't find any sign of habitation. No shelter, no garbage, nothing. She even pulled up a few photos from their visit, just trees and mud. Since then, I've thought about that guy a lot. Who he was. Why he was out there. Was he mentally ill? On the run? Just someone who didn't want to be found? There are hundreds of miles of woods around here. If you really want to disappear, this is the place to do it. Now when I hike, even on familiar trails, I catch myself scanning the tree lines more than I used to. Not for wildlife, for people. Because now I know they might be out there. Watching. Hiding. Just like he was.